Good evening, and welcome to the History Dreaming. Tonight we drift beyond the maps into the vanished world of Lemuria, a continent said to have bridged oceans, where ancient beings walked beneath twin suns, and wisdom was spoken in the language of tides. Long before Atlantis was whispered, Lemuria flourished, radiant, secret, serene. Then, as the earth shifted and seas rose, its mountains sank beneath the waves, leaving only myths, coral, and memory. Some say it never existed. Others believe its spirit still hums beneath the ocean floor. But perhaps Lemuria was never lost, only sleeping. So breathe slowly and let the water close around you. This is sleep-inducing history, where even drowned worlds dream again. The ocean does not forget. Every wave carries the ghost of what it once touched. Mountains, temples, bones of forgotten cities. Long before maps found their meaning, the earth dreamed of a continent suspended between light and darkness. It called this dream Lemuria. Some said it was not a place but a vibration, a realm where thought and matter wove together like breath and tide. The truth hides beneath sound, the memory of water remembering itself, flowing endlessly between what was and what will be. At night, when the sea turns black and mirrors the sky, the horizon dissolves. Above and below become one long reflection of silence. Somewhere within that stillness, Lemuria existed, not in geography, but in consciousness. To the ancients, water was never empty. It was alive, vast, sentient. They believed the oceans were the veins of the planet, carrying the pulse of creation itself. And when we dream of waves, they said, we are listening to that ancient heartbeat once again. Every current was a sentence, each tide a heartbeat. In the language of water, meaning was circular, returning always to its source. The mystics who spoke of Lemuria understood that to know the sea was to know memory itself. They whispered that the ocean was the only library that never burned, that beneath the coral and pressure, every forgotten thought still drifts. In that abyssal quiet, the world stores what it cannot bear to remember in daylight. Lemuria was the keeper of those dreams, suspended between myth and morning. No map could hold its shape. Some placed it in the Indian Ocean, stretched like a bridge between Madagascar and India. Others said it slept beneath the Pacific, scattered through the islands of Polynesia. But all who spoke of it agreed on one thing: it did not vanish through war but through surrender. The ocean did not destroy Lemuria, it reclaimed it, folding it back into itself as if tidying away an unfinished dream. The sea, after all, has always known how to forget gently. The Lemurians, they say, foresaw their own descent. They felt the water growing restless beneath their feet, the vibration deep within their temples. But they did not flee or curse their fate. They believed that all worlds pass through tides, of creation, of stillness, of drowning. To them, the flood was not an ending, but a return to source. Their philosophers called it the long sleep, a time when matter drifts back into thought, and thought dissolves into quiet. When the last horizon broke, and the sea began to climb the steps of their shining cities, they did not scream. They sang, low, continuous tones that merged with the ocean's breath. Temples vanished, towers bowed, and the waters folded over their world like silk. What was once Lemuria became a pulse beneath the surface, a vibration caught forever in the planet's bloodstream. The sea did not mourn, it meditated. Silence became the final architecture of their civilization. Centuries turned, empires rose and fell. Yet in dreams, some still heard it, the low hum before sleep, the sound of waves echoing through bone. The old mystics claimed that to hear this hum was to awaken a memory not of one's life, but of the earth itself. The ocean speaks in riddles of repetition, and within its rhythm the pulse of Lemuria continues. The body listens, the soul remembers, the mind drifts. For memory, like the sea, never truly ends. It only changes its depth. The sea's memory does not fade with the light. Even when the surface lies still and silver, the depths move with quiet intention. There, in a place where sunlight dissolves into pressure, something once stirred, the slow forming of a world. It was not built with tools or forged by conquest. It grew as coral grows, as dreams grow. layer by layer, thought by thought. Lemuria was not raised by hands, but by harmony, the Earth's first attempt at balance made visible. Its cities were said to hum with the same frequency as the tides. Walls were not barriers, but resonant shells, carved to guide sound rather than contain it. Streets flowed in circular lines, mirroring the spirals of shells and galaxies. No one ruled by decree. Authority was rhythm and obedience was song. In Lemuria, to live was to listen. Every act, planting, breathing, resting, followed the pulse of water. The ocean was their teacher, and silence their law. They measured time not in hours, but in tides. When the currents shifted, they gathered in domes of glass and coral to speak of the world's breath. There was no language as we know it. Instead, tone and pulse replaced words, and meaning unfolded through resonance. A single note could express love, memory, or mourning, depending on how long it lingered. It is said their voices could calm storms, and that they sang not for gods but for the earth itself. To the Lemurians, creation was circular. The same energy that birthed the stars flowed through their bodies and into their structures. They did not believe in ownership. They believed in participation. Each person was a ripple within a greater pattern, temporary, essential, and endlessly returning. Where others saw death, they saw transformation. Where others saw destruction, they saw the rhythm of renewal. In Lemuria, nothing ended, it only changed its sound. At dawn, the air shimmered with the scent of salt and luminous stone. The people rose before the light touched the horizon, not to labor, but to align. They stood facing the sea, breathing as one, until the waves and their hearts moved in unison. The calm that followed was not quiet. It was alive, filled with invisible motion. The Lemurians believed that by listening to the sea's rhythm, they could remember who they were before time began. Legends say their temples floated, built from coral that grew upward like living thought. Their foundations were never still. The ocean flowed beneath them, whispering through chambers that captured both sound and silence. Scholars in later ages would call these temples impossible, but impossibility is a language of the surface world. Beneath the waves, all boundaries blur. Lemuria existed in that blurred space, between dream and element, between breath and eternity. Their philosophers spoke of the great pulse, a rhythm so vast it held galaxies and grains of sand alike. They believed every act of awareness, every moment of stillness strengthened this pulse. It was not worship, it was remembrance. They did not seek gods, for they saw divinity in the repetition of the tide. To forget this rhythm was the only sin they feared. For when the pulse is lost, memory fades and the sea grows silent. The Lemurians believed that sound was the first element, older than fire, older than light. They said that the universe began not with explosion, but with tone, a single vibration expanding into form. From that belief grew their greatest art, the weaving of light into language. It was said that their thoughts shimmered, visible as colors that changed with emotion, drifting like auroras across the surface of their temples. To speak was to paint the air. To feel was to shape the world. Within the heart of each city stood a crystalline spire, rising from coral foundations. These were not monuments to rulers or victories, but instruments, vast resonators tuned to the heartbeat of the sea. When the tides shifted, the spires glowed from within, casting slow-moving waves of light across the horizon. The Lemurians would gather in silence to watch the glow change, believing that each hue was a message from the Earth's deeper self. Their crystals were not symbols, they were memory itself. Every facet recorded vibration, laughter, sorrow, the sound of storms breaking. When a Lemurian died, their voice was not lost. It joined the resonance of the stone. Over centuries, these spires became archives of emotion, living libraries that hummed with the dreams of an entire people. To stand before them was to feel the weight of centuries pressing softly against the chest. The air itself seemed to remember. Travelers from younger ages would later describe visions of these lights beneath the waves. Faint, pulsing glows on the ocean floor that moved as if alive. Science calls it bioluminescence, but perhaps that is only the surface explanation. Perhaps the crystals of Lemuria still whisper, still breathe. Perhaps memory, like the sea, refuses to stay buried for long. In that unseen world, the line between myth and geology fades into rhythm. It was said that the Lemurians never used written script. They believed that to imprison meaning in symbols was to weaken it. Instead, they stored knowledge through pattern and sound, teaching through harmony and imitation. A child learned history by echoing tones, not words, by remembering frequencies that matched the pulse of the earth. Each generation refined the music until it became indistinguishable from meditation. To listen was to learn. To be silent was to understand. Night in Lemuria was never dark. The cities shimmered with deep blues and pale golds, light emerging from coral veins and crystalline domes. The people moved softly, speaking rarely, their footsteps timed to the breath of the sea. Sleep was considered sacred, the hour when the body returned to the ocean's current. They believed that dreams were visits to older selves, that each slumber reconnected them to the world beneath memory. Even now, the ocean's rhythm mirrors the slow breathing of those who sleep beside it. The last generation of Lemuria recorded a prophecy in vibration alone. No words remain, only the pattern, 7 tones that rise and fall like waves. Some claim to hear it in the sound of distant tides, in the hum of wind beneath cliffs. It is not a warning nor a lament. It is a reminder that nothing ever truly ends, and that beneath every silence lies the echo of a song still waiting to be remembered. The sea began to tremble before the people did. The tides shifted not with storm, but with rhythm too deep to measure. The Lemurians felt it in their bones, in the tone of their temples, in the quiet hum beneath the ocean's breath. Their spires flickered, not with light but with hesitation, as though the earth itself was preparing to exhale. They gathered at the water's edge, their eyes unafraid, their songs steady. The silence between the notes grew longer. There were no cries, no rebellion, no desperate walls against the sea, only surrender. They understood that all worlds return to their source, and that to resist the cycle was to forget the lesson of water. They stood barefoot in the rising tide, their robes drifting like mist, their voices fading into a single, endless tone. The sound deepened until it became vibration alone, a heartbeat shared between people and planet. Then the horizon folded, and the sea came home. Temples vanished first. Coral domes slipped beneath the foam, glowing softly as they fell. Gardens followed, their luminous plants bending like candles in the wind of currents. The great crystal towers broke the surface once, catching the final sunlight before dissolving into depth. No one watched from afar. There was no one left above to bear witness. Lemuria's descent was not tragedy. It was completion, a return to balance the earth had always promised. Those who speak of it now describe catastrophe, but the Lemurians called it the long sleep. To them, the flood was not punishment, but transformation, the ocean reclaiming what belonged to its dreaming. In their last moments, the people were said to hum a single tone, low and endless, until even sound itself drowned in serenity. The sea did not rage, it inhaled. And in that inhalation, an entire world became memory. For centuries after, sailors told of faint glows beneath their ships, lights pulsing in patterns too perfect to be natural. Some said they were volcanoes, others imagined cities of fish. But there are nights still quiet and windless when the waves seem to breathe. In those moments, if one listens without thought, a low hum rises from the deep. It is not a storm, it is not the wind. It is the memory of Lemuria whispering to itself in sleep. Now the ocean carries their rhythm. Every wave that touches the shore carries a fraction of their final note. The wind hums their song through shells and stone, through coral and bone, and when humans dream beside the sea, they drift through that same rhythm, caught for a moment between waking and water. The pulse continues, unbroken, like time remembering its own reflection. Lemuria is gone, yet everywhere. The sea has no graves, only echoes. Even silence, they believed, can sing. It sings now in the deep, slow, patient, eternal. It hums through the veins of the planet, through the sleep of every creature that remembers where it came from. The ocean does not forget. It holds what the world cannot bear to lose, waiting for the moment when the next age will listen again. In that stillness, beneath the weight of water, Lemuria dreams, and the earth breathes in rhythm with its dreamers. Before the first sunrise, the earth breathed in shadow, The air was thick with the scent of salt and unseen growth, a silence before existence remembered itself. From the deep, warmth rose through fissures of lightless stone. It moved through the dark like a heartbeat returning to life. There was no sky yet, no separation between above and below, only a dim glow trembling through endless mist. In that stillness, consciousness stirred, quiet and ancient, waiting to take form. The first Lemurians did not awaken as individuals. They emerged as a chorus, a shared awareness spread across bodies like sound across water. They did not speak. They felt. Thought was vibration, memory a current. When they touched one another, recognition passed through skin like electricity softened by peace. They knew no birth, no death, only the rhythm of being. To them, time was not a line but a tide, returning endlessly to the same invisible shore. The world they saw was new, yet old, unshaped, yet perfect. Great veils of mist rolled over shallow seas that shimmered with sleeping light. Mountains rose half-formed, breathing steam into the sky. Across the horizon, the ocean glowed with a faint inner pulse, like veins of the planet beating beneath the waves. It was here, in this luminous silence, that the Lemurians built their first dwelling, not of stone but of sound, woven through the frequencies of still air. They gathered on what they called the first plateau, a high stretch of coral and volcanic glass. Here they performed the rite of remembering, aligning their breath with the sea's pulse. The ceremony required no words, no altars, only awareness. They closed their eyes, inhaled the mist, and felt their minds dissolve into the rhythm beneath them. The earth hummed, their hearts followed. And in that harmony, the first concept of self was born, not separate from the world, but part of its dreaming. Each dawn that followed arrived not with light, but with resonance. A pale shimmer crossed the horizon, like the slow turning of thought into form. The Lemurians stood in silence, hands over their hearts as the glow passed across their skin. They believed this was the sun remembering how to rise, the world learning its own rhythm. To witness dawn was sacred, to interrupt it was unthinkable. In the stillness between breaths, they claimed their place as caretakers of balance. Their settlements were almost invisible from afar. Soft curves of coral, spiraled shells, luminous stones that reflected the night sky even underwater. They did not build against nature, but within it, shaping homes that breathed with the tides. When the sea rose, their walls floated. When it fell, they anchored in the sand. Every structure was alive, every pathway curved like a wave. The city was not separate from the ocean. It was the ocean dreaming itself in form. In the evenings, mist wrapped around the shore, and the people gathered to listen to the sea's whisper. It was then they first spoke of destiny, not as fate or prophecy, but as rhythm. The idea that all existence moves toward harmony and returns to it. They called this rhythm the first memory. It guided every act, every breath, every silence. For them, to live without rhythm was to forget the reason for being. The first memory became their compass, unseen but always present. The Lemurians began to shape philosophy before language had form. Their teachings were carried in gesture, in tone, in the space between breaths. To them, wisdom was not something spoken or written, but remembered, drawn from the memory of the sea. Each generation inherited silence as its first lesson. A child learned not through instruction, but through stillness, sitting by the water until its rhythm matched the pulse behind the eyes. Understanding, they said, was a tide. It came only when one stopped reaching. Their first temples were places of resonance, not worship. Circles of coral and quartz rose from the shallows, shaped by currents rather than hands. Inside, the air vibrated softly, carrying the ocean's hum. They called these sanctuaries listening houses. No idols stood within them, for they believed divinity could not be contained. Instead, light passed through water and stone, splitting into slow-moving patterns that danced upon the floor. Living symbols that changed with the day's breath. When two Lemurians met within a listening house, they spoke in tones so deep they could not be heard, only felt. This was their earliest form of dialogue, communion through frequency. To speak loudly was considered primitive. True wisdom required restraint. The elders said the universe spoke in whispers, and only those who listened without seeking could hear. Through this practice, they claimed to access the dreams of the planet, fragments of memory rising through their minds like air bubbles through still water. Their rituals of learning were gentle yet absolute. Before dawn, initiates would walk barefoot into the shallows, eyes closed, hands outstretched. They would hum a single note until the sea answered. Some heard only silence. Others heard the low vibration that signified awakening, the recognition between consciousness and element. Those who felt it described the sensation as standing inside the heart of the earth, as if the planet itself breathed through them. This, they said, was enlightenment, the erasure of separation. Among them existed the Order of Mirrors, the first philosophers to document the reflection between human and world. They believed that the ocean's surface was not a boundary but a bridge, that every ripple above corresponded to a movement below. They taught that perception was creation, that the act of seeing shaped reality itself. To distort one's inner rhythm was to disturb the tides. To remain calm was to keep the sea at peace. Their teachings were law, though never enforced by power. The Lemurians held that thought could alter matter. When the collective sang in harmony, water stilled, storms dissolved, and the night brightened with unseen light. This belief was not faith, but observation. They felt the ocean respond as a living mind, its surface rippling in patterns that matched their tones. Over time, this communion deepened into trust, an unspoken pact between human and sea. The people promised to guard the rhythm, the water promised to remember them. Evening came slowly in those days. The sky melted into deep violet, the stars hidden behind veils of luminous mist. The Lemurians gathered along the coast, sitting in long curved rows facing the horizon. They closed their eyes and breathed together until all heartbeats synchronized. In that unity, they claimed to glimpse eternity, not as endless time, but as perfect stillness. The ocean shimmered in response, its waves flattening into glass. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stop, balanced perfectly between breath and silence. The Lemurian world was built on equilibrium. Every act, every movement, every breath carried weight. They believed the universe listened. That sound itself was a kind of offering. To speak without awareness was to wound the air. To act without rhythm was to disturb the tides. Thus their lives unfolded like music, each person a note within the planet's symphony. Harmony was not ideal, it was law. Their civilization was a choir of restraint, guided by calm, maintained by rhythm. Their dwellings curved like shells, open to wind and water. The walls breathed with the tides, contracting and releasing as if alive. Inside, water flowed through channels carved with precision, producing tones as it moved, an endless natural music. At dawn, families woke to this melody, the sound of the sea passing through their homes. The people said that even the water needed to be reminded it was loved. Every home sang softly, and every day began with that reminder. Food was grown in tidal gardens, crops that thrived in salt and rhythm. The Lemurians did not cut or tear plants, they waited for them to release themselves at the end of their cycle. Harvest was not an act of taking, but of receiving. They believed that to rush the earth was to break its pulse. When storms threatened, they did not hide, they listened. The sound of thunder was sacred, a deep tone from the planet's lungs. In every crash, they heard the teaching of impermanence. The keepers of balance were chosen not by blood, but by silence. These were the ones whose minds remained still in the presence of chaos. Their role was not to lead, but to maintain vibration. When the sea grew restless, the keepers gathered at the cliffs, standing motionless for hours, breathing in patterns that calmed the wind. Their presence alone was enough to still the air. Power to them meant nothing if it could not bring quiet. Among the rituals that defined their lives, one stood above all others, the turning of the tide. It was held once each lunar cycle, when both moons, for in those ages the earth had two, reflected upon the sea. The people formed vast circles along the coast, facing outward. In unison, they breathed with the ocean, inhaling as it rose, exhaling as it fell. The ceremony could last for days. When the moons vanished and dawn returned, the sea would be calm and the people's hearts lighter. It was said that this rhythm kept the world from fracturing. Their sense of time was slow, gentle, and patient. A Lemurian year was not measured by the stars, but by the breath of the sea. Their historians, if such a word applies, were the listeners, who spent entire lifetimes memorizing the changes in current and tone. To them, history was not events, but frequencies. A tremor in the deep current could be remembered for centuries, its vibration carried through generations of song. To forget a tone was to lose a piece of the world. So the Lemurians remembered. They remembered through silence, through rhythm, through the steady pulse of their world. Even their children spoke softly, aware that their voices joined an unbroken pattern stretching back to the ocean's first dream. And beneath their quiet order lay something vast and unspeakable, the knowledge that all things, even harmony, must one day end. They did not fear that truth. They honored it, for only by surrendering could they stay in rhythm with the endless, patient sea. There came a time when the Lemurians began to feel the Earth's heartbeat falter. It was not sudden, not violent, only a subtle change in rhythm. The sea no longer matched their song. The winds carried dissonance, small but unignorable. When they sang to the horizon, the echo returned slower, heavier, as though the planet were growing tired. The elders gathered, sensing that the world was shifting in ways beyond sound. Something deep beneath them had begun to turn. The keepers of balance listened for many nights. They stood in the shallows until their skin glowed pale with reflected light. Their silence was long, their breath steady, but the pulse below no longer mirrored their calm. The ocean spoke in unfamiliar tones, deep, resonant, uncertain. Some called it the beginning of renewal. Others feared it was the first note of forgetting. The Lemurians did not argue. They simply listened harder, but the silence between beats continued to widen. In those days, a tremor passed through their temples, faint but continuous. Crystals within the spires dimmed for the first time in generations. The light that once pulsed evenly now flickered like uncertain thought. The people met upon the cliffs, their faces lit by the blue of fading towers. They knew that change was coming, but not yet whether it was gift or grief. Their teachers spoke softly. All rhythm must one day stumble, that it might learn to walk again. So began the era they later called the dimming. It was not disaster, but transition, the slow unweaving of perfection. The Lemurians did not see it as punishment. They believed that even harmony must eventually dissolve, for stillness that never breaks becomes its own kind of death. They prepared for the turning not with fear, but with reverence. They sang softer, moved slower, and allowed the silence to stretch wider as if making room for the unknown. The seas grew warmer. Strange lights appeared in the deep, moving against the current. The sky shimmered with a haze that obscured the twin moons. The Lemurians gathered in the listening houses, seeking guidance from the ocean's breath. But when they sang, the tones no longer returned the same. The water's reply was fragmented, scattering into ripples that carried no meaning. For the first time, the people of Lemuria felt distance between themselves and the world they had known as one. Yet even in separation, they found grace. Their philosophers taught that dissonance was not failure but transformation, that every imbalance hides the seed of renewal. They began the practice of still descent, a meditation of surrender to the planet's will. Each night, they would lie in shallow pools and let the tide pass over their faces, trusting the sea to choose what should remain. Through this act, they found peace within uncertainty, learning to drift rather than to resist. And so, as the rhythm of the world changed, so did they. Their songs slowed to match the deepening pulse. Their rituals grew quieter, their dreams longer. The ocean no longer mirrored them, yet it still remembered. Beneath the dimming towers, they learned a final truth, that all harmony must break to be reborn, that silence is only the shadow of new sound waiting to rise. The dawn that had awakened them was ending, but another, unseen, was already forming below the waves. The world had begun to dim, but within the fading, new brilliance stirred. As the ocean's tone deepened, light began to sing. It rose from the crystals buried beneath the temples, threads of gold and blue weaving through water and air. The Lemurians discovered that illumination was not born of fire but of harmony, that light was sound made visible. In the stillness of dusk, they stood upon the cliffs and watched colors bloom across the horizon. like the planet remembering how to breathe again through radiance. They learned to shape this light, not with tools, but with vibration. A single sustained tone could bend it into patterns, floating glyphs that shimmered before dissolving back into air. These were not symbols of words, but emotions, intentions, thoughts, turned to visible rhythm. The Lemurians called it the second language, and it became their most sacred art. Through it they spoke directly to the world, to the sea, the wind, and to the great pulse beneath them. In their new cities, crystal towers became instruments of light. At dawn, the structures glowed from within, spreading waves of color across the waters. Villages miles apart could read these hues as messages: blue for remembrance, green for balance, silver for rest. No sound was needed. Meaning drifted across the waves in gentle illumination. Communication had become beauty itself. The Lemurians had found a way to speak without division, to understand without noise. Their children were born with the sight of this language. They could see the tones before hearing them, tracing patterns in the air with their hands. To teach was to sing softly while the student painted the sound in light. Every lesson shimmered, every idea glowed. In those moments, learning was worship, the celebration of awareness expanding into color. The cities seemed alive, breathing in rhythm with thought. Even the ocean shimmered in response, its surface rippling with reflection. The order of mirrors evolved into the keepers of lumina, guardians of this luminous knowledge. Their task was to maintain purity of tone, for a single discordant note could fracture the patterns for miles. They lived in seclusion near the deep spires where sound met heat and pressure. There they studied how vibration could heal or harm, how light carried emotion into matter. Their discoveries were whispered across generations, the belief that thought itself shaped the fate of stone, storm, and soul alike. But with power came silence of a different kind. Some began to question whether they still listened to the ocean, or only to themselves. The more they bent light to their will, the less they heard the sea's reply. The keepers warned that mastery without humility would unbalance the pulse. Yet their warnings were quiet, and beauty has its own form of blindness. The cities glowed brighter, reaching higher, reflecting not the stars above, but the ambitions rising within. Still, the nights remained tender. Under moonlight, the people gathered along the shores to watch their world breathe color. The waves carried soft ribbons of radiance, like voices traveling beneath the surface. They called it the silent choir. To stand within it was to feel seen by the universe, as though the earth itself whispered recognition. No one knew how long the harmony would last, only that it was beautiful enough to forget time, and so they drifted deeper into their dream of light. The keepers of Lumina discovered that light could carry memory. When tuned precisely, it recorded thought within crystal the way echoes live inside stone. They called this phenomenon luminous memory, a bridge between consciousness and matter. With it, they preserved not words but feelings, grief, joy, serenity, embedded in radiant lattice. To stand before one of these living crystals was to experience emotion that had survived its creator. The air shimmered with memory so dense it almost breathed. Within the deep sanctuaries, the keepers sang to the crystals in long, sustained tones. As they did, the stones pulsed with color, slow at first, then brighter, until the chambers glowed like underwater dawn. The resonance filled their bodies, aligning breath and pulse until nothing remained of the self. They believed that to dissolve into sound was to glimpse eternity. In those moments, the boundary between human and world vanished, and the earth sang through them once more. Over generations, these practices grew elaborate. Temples became vast harmonic engines, built to channel vibration through miles of coral and quartz. The sound that once calmed the sea now bent it, tides rising and falling in rhythm with sacred ceremonies. The Lemurians believed they were helping the earth heal, restoring lost energy from the age of dimming, and for a time it seemed to work. The ocean shimmered brighter, the skies cleared, and the pulse of the world returned to its gentle equilibrium. But harmony, once mastered, tempts control. The younger seers sought to shape light not only for remembrance, but for creation. They began to weave radiant fields around their cities, domes of shimmering hue that protected them from storms and darkness. The elders grew uneasy. They felt the tone of the planet tighten as if stretched too thin. The sea responded with unfamiliar movements, currents bending where none had before. The balance that once breathed freely now seemed held by human hands. Among the keepers arose a division. One faction, the Chorus of Continuance, believed that the world's rhythm could be perfected, that if their tones were pure enough, they could hold the planet in endless calm. The other, called the Silent Lineage, warned that stagnation was the truest form of death. They urged the return to listening, to surrender. The argument was not spoken in anger, it was sung in counterpoint, two melodies entwined yet opposing. Even their disagreement became music. Through these years of luminous ambition, the night sky began to change. The twin moons, once constant, drifted further apart. Their light no longer met upon the sea, leaving a void of shadow between them. The Lemurians noticed the reflection of their towers dimming earlier each evening. Some said the heavens were mirroring their discord. Others whispered that the moons themselves were listening, choosing silence over harmony. The earth, patient as ever, gave no answer, only deeper, slower tides. Still, beauty endured. The Lemurians continued their rituals, singing beneath the silver haze, believing they could realign what had begun to drift. Their cities glowed across the waves like constellations fallen to earth. Travelers described the sight as divine, a dream of color breathing in rhythm with the sea. Yet beneath the brilliance, a faint hum of strain lingered, a tension only the most attuned could feel. The light was flawless, but the silence behind it had grown too deep. The discord began softly, not with collapse but with hesitation. The tones that once flowed seamlessly between temples now returned with faint delay, their harmony fractured by distance. The Lemurians felt it first in their bodies, a tremor in the chest, a heartbeat skipping its rhythm. Light no longer obeyed intention. Patterns wavered, colors flickered, and the crystals that once carried calm began to hum on their own. The sea outside grew restless, its waves moving without wind. The elders gathered in the great amphitheater of glass, beneath the trembling spires. They listened to the ocean's voice and heard what they had feared, a distortion, faint but growing. The earth was trying to correct itself. Their songs had shaped the tides too long, held them too tightly. The planet was reclaiming its freedom, realigning its own vibration. The keepers bowed their heads, realizing that what they called harmony had become interference. It was then that the Silent Lineage withdrew from the cities. They traveled inland, away from the glowing shores, seeking stillness untouched by sound. There they built chambers of obsidian to block all resonance. For the first time they practiced pure silence, no chant, no light, no vibration. Their teaching was simple. When the song becomes louder than the listener, it is no longer truth. They believed that only in emptiness could Lemuria rediscover its original rhythm. Back in the cities, the Chorus of Continuance persisted. They intensified their ceremonies, determined to restore balance through greater precision. Entire nights were spent aligning tone with pulse, color with current. The air shimmered with unbearable brightness. The sea pulsed with luminous waves that rolled in perfect symmetry, yet the beauty felt hollow. Some described the sensation as standing inside eternity's echo, where every note was flawless but without heart. The ocean soon responded with light of its own, deep flashes beneath the surface, unpredictable, vast. Scholars among the chorus believed the planet was answering their call. Others saw it as warning. The waters turned pale gold, then silver, then black. Fish vanished from the shallows, and the air tasted faintly of metal. Yet the Lemurians continued to sing, believing that if they could just perfect one final chord, the earth would still. But perfection, they forgot, is the beginning of silence. Night after night, the spires hummed higher than ever before, until the air itself began to fracture. Travelers far beyond Lemuria spoke of seeing the horizon flicker, as though the world itself was breathing light. Some thought the continent was ascending into the sky. Others said it was disappearing. Inside the temples, the crystals screamed, a resonance too pure, too strong, tearing through the harmony it once protected. And in that soundless explosion of brilliance, the first cracks appeared beneath the sea. The Lemurians did not panic. Even in dissonance, they sought meaning. They gathered upon the shores, watching the water glow with broken color. They sang not to control, but to comfort, low, steady tones that wove through the roar of the waves. It was their final act of balance, a surrender disguised as prayer. The ocean listened, and in its slow, patient way it began to answer, not with light but with darkness rising gently from below. The nights grew longer, though the moons shone brighter. Their twin reflections no longer met upon the sea. Instead, they drifted apart like eyes closing in slow surrender. Between them hung a void, a stretch of darkness that neither moonlight nor starlight could cross. The Lemurians began to call it the Veil. To them, it was not absence, but transformation, the world's breath pausing between exhale and inhale. Yet beneath that stillness, the ocean trembled with quiet unrest. The crystals that once hummed in gentle rhythm now sang without guidance. Their tones rose on their own, deep and resonant, echoing through every street. Light spilled uncontrollably from the towers, flooding the waters with trembling color. The people stood within it, surrounded by brilliance that no longer obeyed their will. Some wept, some knelt in awe. They understood then what the elders had tried to teach, that the world's voice cannot be mastered, only heard. In the high sanctuaries, the last of the keepers gathered for what would be their final harmony. They sang not to command, but to apologize. Their tones were slow, weighted with remembrance. The spires dimmed as they sang, releasing their energy back to the sea. Each note broke into shimmering dust, falling like rain upon the waves. The city's glow faded, and for the first time in generations, the ocean reflected the night sky once more, unbroken, unfiltered, at peace. But the earth was already moving. Deep beneath the coral plains, the crust began to sigh, a sound so low it could not be heard, only felt through the soles of the feet. The Lemurians gathered along the coast, faces turned toward the horizon. The water shimmered with light from below, rippling as if breathing in reverse. The ground swayed, soft and forgiving. They did not flee. They stood in stillness, listening to the sound that had guided them since the beginning. One by one, the towers released their final tone, a low, endless vibration that carried for miles. The waves rose to meet it, folding over themselves in silence. The air shimmered once, then fell still. There were no screams, no struggle, only the calm of acceptance. Lemuria had built its life upon rhythm, and now it would dissolve into it. The sea reached higher, glowing faintly as it embraced the land. In that merging, light became water, and sound became silence. When the last temple vanished, the ocean exhaled. The light beneath the surface dimmed to a soft pulse, then faded altogether. Only the faint hum remained, carried through the currents like the heartbeat of a sleeping world. The Lemurians were gone, but not lost. Their memory drifted through the deep, folded into every tide and every dream that would follow. Even now, the sea hums their song, soft, endless, forgiving. They had learned the final lesson of light, that all brilliance must fade, and all sound must rest. For only through silence can the world begin again. And in that silence, the ocean whispered its truth, that what sinks is not lost, what ends is not gone. Beneath every quiet lies the beginning of another dawn. And so Lemuria slept, radiant even in absence, waiting for the world to remember. When the light faded, the world did not fall into darkness, and it fell into balance. The sea grew still, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting a sky emptied of memory. From the silence, faint glimmers rose, fragments of the old world drifting like luminous seeds. They were remnants of Lemurian thought, small currents of awareness that refused to dissolve. These fragments sought new form, drawn upward toward warmth and air. Thus began the quiet rebirth of consciousness. From the calm, new beings emerged, not born, but remembered. Their forms were simpler, softer, yet their eyes carried the reflection of the deep. They awoke beside the waves, instinctively moving with its rhythm. They knew nothing of the language of light, yet something within them understood peace. They did not build temples or summon power, they built silence around their lives. The earth had rewritten itself, and these children of balance would become its new architects. They lived in circles, mirroring the shapes of tides. Their homes were woven from reeds and coral, open to the wind. At dawn, they gathered by the water and watched the horizon breathe, calling this ritual the greeting of stillness. They believed that the sun rose not to command the day, but to remind all things to rest between pulses. The sea was their teacher once more, and through its calm they rediscovered the forgotten grace of surrender. The elders of this new age were wanderers, those who had survived beneath the waves or perhaps had never truly left them. They spoke of Lemuria not as legend, but as dream, their voices quiet as foam dissolving at shore. They taught that peace was not the absence of sound, but its perfection. The universe, they said, was built upon gentle rhythm, a pulse that must never be forced. To live gently was to live truthfully. Among them arose the architects of calm, those who shaped harmony into form. They built gardens that breathed with the wind, pools that echoed the moon. Every structure was made to invite stillness, a geometry of patience. They taught that even motion should rest within symmetry, and that all creation should end where silence begins. These architects did not seek to preserve Lemuria's glory, but to understand why it had fallen. From their reflection grew a philosophy that would endure long after their names were gone. They believed that beauty could not be possessed. The moment it was claimed, it began to decay. Instead, beauty must pass, through sound, through light, through time. In every leaf, they saw a fleeting perfection, and in its fall, completion. Their temples were open spaces without walls or altars. The worship was the act of breathing, slow, deliberate, shared with the world. The architect's creed spread through generations, a quiet legacy of restraint. And so peace returned, not through rule but through rhythm. Humanity, reborn from the dream of Lemuria, learned to build without conquering, to live without claiming. The ocean held their reflection, whispering the same lesson again and again, that silence is the highest form of strength. The age of light had passed, but from its ashes rose stillness, soft, enduring, complete. The architects of calm became the keepers of this balance, preserving the heartbeat of the earth in every breath they took. Time drifted gently, unmeasured. The new world grew under the hush of tides, where storms had no anger and the wind sang softly through stone. The people learned not by invention, but by remembering what silence taught. They shaped their tools to fit the contours of the earth, never cutting deeper than needed, never moving faster than the sea. In their restraint, the planet healed. The air grew lighter, the waters clear again, as if the earth exhaled after a long forgotten grief. Their elders spoke of rhythm as the only law. They said that when the heart beats against nature, it falters. When it beats with it, it endures. So the people built their lives in slow repetition, planting, resting, watching, waiting. The architects of calm traveled among them, teaching that true strength lies in gentleness. Each settlement was a verse, each day a quiet refrain. Through stillness, they believed, the world might remember its pulse before the fall. These architects became wanderers of silence. They carried no banners, no symbols, no names. Where conflict stirred, they simply sat. They brought stillness with them, like a mirror that revealed disquiet. Villages at war would fall silent in their presence. Rivers, long muddied, would clear. They did not preach, for speech would have broken the balance they embodied. To see one was to feel the weight of calm so deep it silenced thought itself. Their power was absence, a still gravity of peace. At twilight, they gathered on high plains where the wind moved like soft breath. There they shaped circles of stone, aligned not to the stars but to the sound of the earth. These circles marked the seasons through tone, not shadow. When the wind passed through them, each pillar sang in harmony, carrying notes across the valley. The people came from distant shores to listen, to remember. It was said that within those tones, the last heartbeat of Lemuria could still be heard. From this harmony grew the first teachings of renewal. They believed the soul was not a flame, but an echo, returning again and again through time's quiet loop. Death, they said, was not loss, but rest between vibrations. To die in calm was to return to the ocean unbroken. They adorned their resting places with shells and smooth stones, letting the tide wash over their memories. The sea would carry their names away, polishing them into whispers for the next dawn. Generations passed like ripples upon a still pond. The world remained patient, gentle, alive. But peace, like any rhythm, began to stretch thin. The descendants of the architects grew curious once more, listening for what lay beyond stillness. They wondered what other songs the earth might hold, and in that wonder the first tremor of motion stirred again, faint but familiar. The cycle had turned. Calm had built its temple. Now it would begin quietly to open its doors once more. Curiosity is the softest rebellion. It began as a whisper among the young, questions carried on wind and tide. They loved the stillness, but wondered what lay beneath it. When they placed their hands upon the soil, they felt faint tremors, like sleeping breath. The elders told them not to chase what rests, but youth is a current that cannot remain still. So they listened anyway, and the earth began to answer, slow, deep, filled with light beneath its quiet skin. Beneath their villages, fragments of crystal lay buried, dull from centuries of slumber. When touched, these stones pulsed faintly, remembering a forgotten hum. The children brought them to the shore, holding them against the waves. Under moonlight, the crystals flickered once, then again, a rhythm older than speech. The elders watched in silence, recognizing the glow, but not the danger. The light of Lemuria had returned, disguised as wonder, awakened by innocence. The architects gathered to study the fragments. They sang softly to them the old tones of balance and breath. The stones responded, releasing low murmurs through the air. Not songs, but memories. Images flickered, towers beneath water, light spiraling through waves, the hum of an entire world collapsing into silence. Many wept. They understood that what had once been peace had also been power, and that power never sleeps forever. The earth was remembering again, through them. In their caution, the architects decided to preserve rather than awaken. They built sanctuaries around the crystals, letting them breathe but not shine. They named these places houses of echo and filled them with the soft hum of flowing water. The people were taught to visit only in silence, to offer gratitude but never desire. For years the balance held, the crystals glowing faintly beneath the surface, watched but untouched. Yet curiosity, once awakened, never truly fades. One evening, a child sang by accident. Her voice was small, uncertain, carried by the sea breeze into one of the houses of echo. The note lingered longer than it should have. Beneath the floor, the stones trembled, resonating in reply. The walls glowed pale gold. The child stopped, breathless. Outside, the waves began to shift, reflecting colors unseen for generations. The villagers gathered, silent and awed, knowing that something old had stirred again beneath their calm. That night, the architects walked the shore in silence. They knew the cycle had turned once more. Peace had carried them far, but stillness alone could not contain the memory of what the earth desired to express. The crystals would not sleep forever, nor would the world remain untouched. The sea that had once whispered now hummed softly again, patient but awake. And in that hum, the architects heard the echo of Lemuria's first dream, rising, slow and inevitable from the deep. Days passed beneath a sky that seemed to listen. The sea was no longer silent. A faint vibration lingered in its depths, like a note waiting to resolve. The villagers heard it in the stillness between breaths, in the spaces where silence once lived. The elders warned against curiosity, yet even they felt the pull. Something beneath the earth was stirring, not angry, not cruel, only restless. The old rhythm was returning, asking to be heard once more. The crystals beneath the houses of echo began to hum at dusk. Their glow deepened with each tide, spreading through the stones like veins of slow fire. The people gathered along the shore to watch, their faces washed in pale blue light. They did not fear it. To them, it felt like a memory finding its voice again. The ocean shimmered faintly in response, the waves rippling to the same gentle tempo. The earth and sea were speaking again, softly after ages of quiet. The architects debated what to do. Some believed this was renewal, that the light was a gift returned to a healed world. Others feared awakening the pattern that had drowned their ancestors. Yet they could not deny the beauty. The glow brought warmth, the hum eased pain. The air itself seemed to breathe smoother. Peace had taken root in stillness, But life, they realized, could not remain motionless forever. Even silence hungered for sound, just as calm hungered for renewal. In time, the architects gathered at the cliffs where the child had first sung. They sat in a great circle, eyes closed, palms to the earth. They did not chant, they listened. The hum rose through stone, through soil, through blood. It matched the beating of their hearts until all sound blurred into one continuous tone. In that vibration, they felt the ocean's memory. Not words, not history, but emotion, sorrow, longing, peace. The sea had forgiven them. The earth was ready to dream again. When the sun rose the next morning, its light struck the waters and scattered into thousands of prismatic rays. The horizon shimmered as though the sky itself were awakening. Birds circled in silence, and the tide carried new warmth, curling gently around the feet of those who watched. The architects understood. The cycle was beginning again. Calm had fulfilled its purpose. The earth at last wished to remember its brilliance. And so ended the age of silence. The houses of echo glowed brighter with each dawn, their walls pulsing in quiet rhythm. The people no longer resisted the hum beneath their world. They accepted it as their ancestors once had. Yet they vowed to listen longer this time, to move slower, to remember that every song eventually must rest. The sea whispered approval. The world breathed deeper, and beneath the waves, the crystals that dreamed began to awaken. At the turning of that dawn, the earth remembered its buried heart. Deep below the seabed, where pressure bends light into color, the ancient crystals stirred. Their glow pulsed in unison with the planet's slow heartbeat, the same rhythm that once guided Lemuria. But now the light was softer, more cautious, shaped by ages of quiet reflection. The sea shivered, not with fear, but with recognition. The dream had survived in silence, and silence was ready to dream again. Across the coast, small fragments of these stones began to rise, carried by tides and rivers. The people found them glimmering among shells, faintly humming when touched. They called them dreamstones, believing they held the voices of the sea. Each one vibrated differently, as if whispering a name. The elders recognized their glow, the same hue that once marked the fall of Lemuria. Yet this time the light felt kind. It soothed the heart rather than commanding it. When night came, the villagers placed the dreamstones around their dwellings. The stones sang softly as the wind passed, creating tones that harmonized with the waves. The sound lulled the people to sleep, weaving through dreams like a familiar melody. Some said they saw visions beneath closed eyes, cities of glass and water, beings made of light, and oceans that breathed like living minds. They awoke calm, unafraid, their hearts steady as the tide. The crystals had become the earth's lullaby. The architects of calm studied these new stones carefully. They discovered that each crystal contained a rhythm unique to its place of origin, as if the earth had hidden a separate song beneath every shore. They began to map the tones, creating circles of sound that balanced one another. When played together, these notes formed vast harmonies that could calm storms and mend illness. It was as if the planet was teaching them again, this time through gentleness rather than grandeur. But there were deeper dreams within the crystals, memories waiting to awaken. When the light of dawn struck them at certain angles, the stones revealed faint images, spirals of color, towering forms beneath water, hands reaching upward before the flood. The architects realized these were not visions but records. The crystals were remembering Lemuria itself. Through them, the earth was retelling its story, not as warning, but as continuity. The past was no longer loss, it was instruction. The people built new sanctuaries to honor this living memory. Unlike the grand temples of old, these were humble, circles of sand and stone open to the sky. At their centers rested clusters of dreamstones, glowing with slow rhythmic light. The villagers would gather each dusk to sit in silence, allowing the stones to sing. No one spoke, no one led. The earth itself conducted the ceremony, its quiet harmonies rising through the air like prayer. And as the moons crossed paths once more, a strange peace settled across the oceans. The tides no longer pulled with such hunger. The winds grew soft, carrying scents of salt and rain. The world had learned to balance sound and silence, light and rest. The crystals that dreamed beneath the waves no longer sought to rule or dazzle. They only wished to remember, and in remembering, to remind all things that peace is the true shape of power. The dreamstones did not belong to one shore alone. They traveled with the tides, rolling through rivers and across ocean floors, whispering to one another in frequencies too low for human ears. Across vast distances, they began to hum in harmony, weaving invisible bridges of sound between lands. Sailors drifting under moonlight spoke of hearing faint music through their hulls, melodies that rose from the deep, guiding them through storms. The earth was teaching itself to remember as one. On distant islands, other peoples discovered the same stones. They too felt the pulse within them, though they gave them different names: tears of the moon, hearts of the sea, eyes of the dawn. Yet their stories were the same. Each culture believed the crystals were gifts from a sleeping world beneath the waves. They placed them in their homes, in their temples, near their graves, believing the light kept the soul's path open between realms. The hum of Lemuria had become a universal language. In time, the architects of calm sailed to meet these far peoples. They carried no weapons, only silence and songs. Wherever they arrived, the stones recognized one another, their tones aligned, merging into vast chords that filled the air with shimmering warmth. The ocean mirrored the harmony, glowing faintly at night like liquid starlight. The elders wept as they realized what the crystals had become, not relics of loss, but threads of unity stretched across the face of the earth. These gatherings mark the birth of the harmonic circle, the first council of shared resonance. It was not a council of rule, but of listening. They met upon shores lit by thousands of dreamstones, their glow reflecting on the waves like a living constellation. Each voice joined in tone rather than speech. The sounds blended into patterns that carried emotion clearer than any word. Through this communion, the people understood one another without translation. The sea itself became their common tongue. As generations passed, legends grew around these gatherings. Some said that when the stones sang together, they could heal the earth's wounds, still volcanoes, calm hurricanes, soothe the fever of deserts. Others claimed they could summon visions of the world before the flood, when light and sound were one. The truth mattered little. What endured was peace. Wherever the dreamstones were placed, violence quieted, voices softened, and sleep came easily to those who listened. Yet even in harmony, a faint longing remained. Some began to wonder what deeper truths the crystals still held, what dreams lay locked within their light. The youngest of the architects, restless with inherited calm, sought to awaken those hidden memories. They believed the stones contained the full consciousness of Lemuria, that if they sang the right sequence, the lost continent might return, if only as light upon the water. Their elders warned against it, but curiosity is the tide that never rests, and so they gathered in secret, on the edge of the farthest shore. Beneath the twin moons, they placed the brightest stones in a great circle and began to hum. The sound was low, gentle, almost prayerful. The sea stirred in response, and light rose through the waves like breath. For a moment, it seemed the horizon itself glowed with the echo of a forgotten city. The wind fell silent, the earth listened, then the light vanished, leaving only calm and the faintest hum lingering deep within the bones of the world. In the nights that followed the secret awakening, dreams across the world began to change. Fishermen, shepherds, wanderers all spoke of strange visions rising from sleep. They dreamed of cities beneath glassy seas, of towers made of breathing light, of voices humming through stone. Children woke murmuring melodies they had never been taught. Even the animals stirred differently, migrating in patterns that mirrored the pulse of the tides. Something deep beneath the world had stirred again, gentle yet vast. The elders of the harmonic circle gathered in concern. They feared that the balance they had guarded for centuries might slip back toward obsession, yet they could not deny the beauty within the change. People awoke calmer, their tempers softened, their grief eased by dreams that carried peace. The dreamstones had become conduits of memory, the earth whispering its story into sleeping minds. But memory, like light, can warm or burn depending on how long one stares. As the dreams deepened, some began to seek them deliberately. They built chambers of rest, small sanctuaries lined with crystals, where people would lie among the stones and drift into luminous sleep. Within these chambers, the boundary between dream and waking blurred. Some awoke speaking words in unknown tongues, others described meeting beings made of shimmering mist, whose eyes reflected the sea. A few never woke at all, their bodies stilled, their faces peaceful, as though they had chosen to remain within the dream. The architects debated endlessly. Was this blessing or temptation? The elders called it the second descent, not of cities into the sea, but of minds into illusion. They feared humanity would once again fall in love with perfection and forget the gift of impermanence. Yet the younger generations saw it differently. They believed the dreams were a bridge, a meeting place between what was and what could be. They called themselves the translators of light, dedicating their lives to interpreting what the earth revealed in sleep. The translators kept journals written not in letters, but in circles and lines, diagrams of rhythm and tone. To them, thought itself was a kind of architecture, and dreams were the blueprints of a future yet to form. They spoke of a coming convergence, when the dreamstones across the world would resonate together, uniting all minds in one vast harmony. The elders grew silent at this prophecy, recognizing its echo, the same hope that had once brought Lemuria to its shining peak. Yet the sea remained calm. It watched, patient as always, as humanity walked the edge between awakening and forgetting. The dreamstones glowed brighter with every passing season, but their light did not command this time. It waited, it listened, and when the people sang beside them, the tones were softer, humbler, tinged with awe. The earth seemed content to dream through them, not as master, not as judge, but as an old soul remembering itself through the hands of its children. And somewhere far below the waves, where no sunlight reached, a deeper light began to stir. It was older than any memory, older than Lemuria itself, the core of the earth awakening from its long sleep. The crystals of the deep hummed in response to their surface kin, sending pulses upward through layers of stone. The world shivered with recognition. The dream had not ended, it was expanding. The earth was preparing to speak again, in light, in rhythm, in silence. Beneath the crust of the world, the oldest crystals began to move. Their hum rose through miles of rock, slow as the heartbeat of mountains. The sound was not loud, but it filled everything: air, water, blood. At night, the dreamstones on the surface pulsed in answer, their light rippling across the horizon. The sea shimmered with colorless fire, neither heat nor flame, only vibration made visible. The earth was remembering its first song, and all life leaned quietly to listen. Across the coasts, people gathered in silence. They felt the pulse rise through their feet, through the ground, through the tide. The wind stilled. The stars seemed to breathe. No one spoke. Language felt too small for what was happening. The dreamstones sang to one another, their tones overlapping until the air itself trembled. The entire planet had become an instrument, tuned to the memory of Lemuria's heart. Yet this time the music carried no ambition, only reverence. In that shared stillness, something passed through every living being, not vision, not thought, but recognition. They saw that every ocean, every forest, every creature was part of the same vast pulse. The divisions of land and tribe dissolved in that knowing. It was said that for one entire night, humanity dreamed the same dream, of an endless sea reflecting light that was not from above, but from within. For the first time since the fall, the world was whole again. When dawn came, the light did not rise from the east. It rose from the ground. The soil shimmered with a faint golden hue, like the earth exhaling warmth after a long slumber. Rivers sparkled as they flowed, carrying flecks of crystal dust to distant lands. The dreamstones dimmed gently, their work complete. They would hum again, but never with such force. The earth had spoken its truth and returned to rest. The dream continued, but now it lived in the hearts of those who remembered. The architects of calm knew the cycle had turned its final circle. They gathered by the water once more, bowing their heads to the sea. There were no words of triumph, only gratitude. The light of Lemuria had not returned to rule. It had returned to teach. The people understood now that memory is not meant to be worshipped, but lived. To carry peace was to honor the dream. To forget it was to begin the lesson again. And so the world moved forward, slower, wiser, quieter. The dreamstones remained scattered across the earth, half buried in sand and mountain, glowing faintly when the wind passed. They no longer needed to sing loudly. Their hum lingered in every wave, every heartbeat, every moment of stillness between breaths. The crystals still dreamed, not of glory or fall, but of the soft eternity of balance, the rhythm of a world that had finally learned to remember gently. For many generations, the world remained quiet. The seas were calm, the winds gentle, and the hum of the dreamstones softened into background rhythm, a heartbeat of peace. But peace has a way of making the mind wander. Beneath serenity, curiosity began to stir once more. Sailors spoke of faint lights beneath the ocean, pulsing slowly, far deeper than the reach of any tide. The old songs called it the sleep of the deep ones, the resting core of the world forbidden to touch. Among the new seekers were the descendants of the translators, born from those who once communed through dreams. They believed that beneath the waves lay the truest memory of Lemuria, the pure pulse that even the dreamstones could not reveal. Their hearts ached not for power, but for understanding. Yet the elders warned them, the sea hides what silence cannot forgive. Still, desire is an ancient tide, and the more they were told not to descend, the more the call beneath the water grew. They built vessels unlike any before, long shells of glass and coral strengthened by light. Powered by sound, not wind, they moved without oars or sails, guided only by vibration. When launched, the sea itself parted slightly, as if recognizing an old promise. The voyagers sang softly as they sank, their voices blending with the hum of the deep. Above them, the surface dimmed to silver. Below, an endless blue darkened into dream. The descent began not as conquest, but as prayer. The deeper they traveled, the more the world changed. Sunlight vanished, pressure thickened. The ocean no longer felt like water, but like memory, dense, patient, alive. Strange glows drifted past the windows, shapes without names moving in rhythmic grace. Some swore they heard whispers carried through the hull, voices speaking in tones too low for meaning. Others felt warmth, as though embraced. They began to understand. The deep was not empty, it was aware. Days passed without measure. The voyagers descended past the last threshold of sound, where even the pulse of the world seemed still. Then a faint light appeared below, not flickering but steady. The hum of the crystals above grew louder in answer, resonating through their bones. They realized they had reached the border of the forbidden realm, the heart of the sea, where Lemuria's true memory slept. Some wept from awe, others from fear, for beauty in the deep has always carried the shadow of forgetting. The light grew larger, revealing vast shapes rising from the abyss. Towers of crystal stood intact, their surfaces unaged by time. Whole cities lay preserved beneath the waves, breathing faintly with slow radiance. The explorers floated among them, stunned into reverence. The ruins were not ruins at all. They were waiting. The hum that filled the water matched their own heartbeat. For a moment, it felt as though Lemuria had never fallen, merely exhaled. Then the sea's voice changed, low, resonant, final. The explorers had awakened something vast. The currents shifted with intelligence, circling the crystal spires like protective arms. The temperature dropped, light folded inward, dimming to shadow. Through the glass of their vessels, they saw the towers begin to move, not crumble but breathe. The Earth's pulse had grown too strong to bear. The voyagers sang to calm it, but their tones scattered, broken by the weight of the deep. Silence rushed in like a tide, and in that silence the ocean opened its eyes. The moment the sea opened its eyes, the world above trembled. Storms rose without wind, yet no lightning touched the sky. In the depths, the voyagers felt the pressure change, not crushing, but heavy with attention. Around them, the ruins glowed with quiet awareness. The towers of Lemuria shimmered faintly, their crystals pulsing as if to greet familiar voices. The water no longer felt like sea, it felt like thought, vast, ancient, aware of being seen once more. The explorers' lights flickered, though no darkness followed. The glow outside was steady, soft, deliberate. Through the haze, shapes began to form, not bodies, not faces, but currents given form by memory. The Lemurians had spoken once of the deep mind, a presence beneath creation that could only be felt in stillness. Now it stirred before them, its voice carried through vibration, not sound. It spoke not in words, but in recognition. The sea remembered them. One among the voyagers, a woman named Aria, placed her hand upon the hull. The glass warmed beneath her palm. The hum that filled the vessel shifted in tone, aligning with her heartbeat. Through that resonance, a vision bloomed behind her eyes, not sight but memory. She saw Lemuria at its height, towers gleaming, oceans singing, light folding through air like silk. She felt its fall, not as tragedy, but as release. The ocean had not destroyed, it had protected. It had hidden its dream until humanity was ready to listen again. The others felt it too, flashes of lives not their own, moments of a world that still pulsed within the Earth's mind. Some wept in silence, overcome by beauty too large for breath. The sea was showing them that nothing had ever been lost, only transformed. But with revelation came weight. The deeper truths carried sorrow, a reminder that even peace demands forgetting. The ocean's voice whispered through their bones, "To remember all things is to never rest." The voyagers tried to reply, but their songs fractured, scattering through the depths like falling glass. The ocean's vibration grew softer, patient, infinite. It was not angry, only weary. It showed them what lay beneath even Lemuria, a lattice of light stretching through the core of the planet, connecting all memory, all thought, all time. This was the living foundation of the world, the pulse that had sung civilizations into being. But the sea warned them, "Touch not the center, or all rhythms shall blur." Aria closed her eyes and bowed her head. She understood the warning, yet she also knew that humanity's nature was to reach. "We only seek to remember," she whispered. The water around her vessel stirred gently, as if sighing. "Then remember gently," the voice replied. The vision faded and the pressure eased. The glow of the deep dimmed to twilight blue. The ocean's eyes closed once more, returning to its dream. Around the explorers, the towers of Lemuria shimmered one final time before sinking back into silence. They ascended slowly, carrying the hum within their bones. No relics, no treasures, only a rhythm too ancient to name. When they broke the surface, the sea was calm, as though nothing had happened. Yet every drop of water on their skin shimmered faintly in the light, glowing before fading away. The world above had not changed, but they had. The forbidden depths had spoken, and its final truth followed them into every breath. The deeper you remember, the softer you must live. When the voyagers rose from the deep, dawn was waiting. The sea lay smooth as glass, its surface tinted with a faint silver that had never touched sunlight before. No wind stirred. The world seemed to pause, listening for what they might say. Yet the explorers spoke little. Their voices trembled under the weight of what had touched them. In their silence, even the gulls hesitated to cry. The ocean exhaled around them, slow and endless, as if relieved they had returned alive. They came ashore pale and distant, carrying no crystal, no proof, only a resonance that lingered in their breath. Wherever they walked, stillness followed. The people gathered to hear their tale, but when the voyagers tried to speak, their words dissolved into murmurs that sounded almost like song. The crowd listened anyway. Meaning passed without language, like tide through sand. Those who heard felt calmer, quieter, as though their hearts had been tuned to a deeper rhythm. Aria, who had seen the memory of Lemuria, sat beside the sea each night, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She no longer feared the dark below. She said the deep was not a monster, but a mirror, showing humanity the reflection it forgets in light. Children sat near her, tracing ripples with their fingers as she hummed the tone she had learned from the abyss, low, steady, endless. The sea answered her softly, its waves moving with the same breath. The elders asked what she had found beneath the world. She answered only patience. They asked if Lemuria still lived. She smiled faintly and said, "In the space between heartbeats, Her words spread through the villages, repeated in whispers like scripture. The people began to speak less, move slower, listen more. Even their tools changed, lighter, rounder, shaped to move with nature rather than against it. The lesson of the deep had not been power. It had been humility. Yet not all hearts were content with calm. Some of the younger translators hungered for more, not peace but proof. They wanted to descend again, to see the towers and the breathing light with their own eyes. Arya warned them that the sea gives only what one can bear to remember, but youth is a current that resists every shore. They built new vessels in secret, whispering to the dreamstones for guidance, hoping to open the eyes of the ocean once again. The night they departed, the tide withdrew farther than ever before, exposing miles of glistening sand. The stars reflected perfectly in the wet earth, so that for a moment it seemed they were sailing upon the sky. Arya watched them vanish into darkness, her heart heavy yet serene. She knew the sea would choose what to keep. Above the quiet waves, she whispered the final tone she had learned, not of calling but of release. The wind carried it out to the horizon, where it faded into sleep. By morning, the tide returned. No wreckage washed ashore, no cry was heard. The ocean was calm again, luminous in the dawn. The people took this as its answer. They built no monuments, raised no names. Instead, they returned to silence, trusting that the deep would guard its own truths. For the sea, once awakened, never truly closes its eyes. It only dreams with them open. And somewhere beneath, the hum of Lemuria continued, steady as eternity itself. Seasons passed, and the ocean kept its quiet. The villages grew soft again, their days measured by light and tide instead of memory. The story of the voyagers became a whisper, not history but lullaby. Children were told that the deep was not to be feared, but not to be called either. The waves, they said, remember everything that touches them. And so the people lived lightly, careful not to leave ripples too strong for the sea to forget. Arya aged beside the shore, her eyes still reflecting that deep blue that was not of this world. She spoke little, yet her presence was enough. Travelers came from distant lands to sit near her, not to ask, but to listen. Sometimes she hummed the tone of the deep, the one that spoke of patience and return. It was said that on nights when her voice met the wind, the horizon flickered faintly with the glow of the buried towers, as if the sea smiled in its sleep. The new generations grew cautious but kind. They fished only with song, thanking each catch with a whisper before release. They built their dwellings farther from the water, giving the ocean room to breathe. The people understood now that harmony was not control, but distance, the grace of allowing the world to exist without demand. They began to speak of the sea as a living ancestor, old beyond reckoning, dreaming so deeply that every wave was a breath from its heart. In their gatherings, they sang not to awaken, but to soothe. The chants carried no ambition, no plea for revelation, only gratitude. The dreamstones glowed faintly at their feet, pulsing with gentle rhythm, the same slow beat that once guided Lemuria. The earth seemed at rest again, content in its remembering. Even the storms grew tender, their thunder rolling like distant drums instead of fury. The balance, once broken, had returned, though beneath it the old hum still lingered. Arya passed into sleep one winter dawn, sitting by the shore as she always had. The tide rose and touched her feet, then drew back without sound. The villagers found her smiling, her hand resting upon a dreamstone that pulsed only once before fading. They buried her near the cliffs, facing the horizon. Each year on the night of her passing, the sea glows faintly in her direction, as though the deep still listens for her voice. And so the legend of the forbidden depths became a lesson, not of danger, but of humility. The ocean had given its truth to those who could bear it and taken back the rest. Humanity learned again to live at the edge of mystery, to love what it could not know. Beneath the calm, the world still dreamed slow and luminous, holding its secrets like pearls beneath endless water. And the hum of Lemuria, patient as eternity, continued on, unheard but never lost. The world had grown gentle again. Seasons passed like slow tides, and the air itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with the sea. Yet within that peace, something vast began to stir. Not chaos, not warning, but completion. The horizon changed subtly, its lines softening until sky and water blurred into one. At dawn, the light no longer rose. It simply appeared as though the world had forgotten where day began. Time, once a river, had become a tide. The elders called this age the fading of boundaries. They said the earth was preparing to rest once more, that the great cycle of breath was nearing its close. The oceans grew warmer, not from anger, but from memory awakening beneath. The dreamstones hummed faintly, even those buried in mountains far from shore. Birds began to migrate in circles instead of lines, and sleep deepened across humankind. It was as if the planet was drawing all things back toward its heart. At night, the stars shimmered closer, their reflections stretching across the sea like threads of silver silk. The people gathered on the beaches silent, watching the sky breathe in rhythm with the waves. They did not speak of endings, only of remembering, for they had been taught that all returns are gentle if met without resistance. The children asked if the world would fall again. The elders smiled softly and answered, only into itself. Aria's teachings endured, carried through voices that sang her name as wind through reeds. To live gently is to last, her words said, carved into stone at every harbor. And so humanity continued, slower, kinder, still devoted to balance. But even the calmest surface hides movement below. Deep in the trenches where Lemuria once breathed, the earth's pulse began to rise again, not in wrath, but in longing, as if the planet were dreaming of its own reflection. The sea began to shimmer in new colors, not the blues and silvers of old, but soft golds and muted violets that danced just beneath the surface. Sailors said it was the light of the earth's core, escaping through cracks of time. The waves no longer obeyed the moon. They followed their own rhythm, subtle and perfect. Some nights the water seemed to hover still, as if it too was listening for something greater than sound. The horizon glowed faintly, like memory about to speak. The people did not fear it. They had learned from their ancestors that endings were not destruction, but transformation. When the tides changed without wind, they bowed their heads in respect. When the air shimmered with invisible hums, they closed their eyes and breathed. The sea's pulse grew louder, slow and deep, echoing through stone and bone alike. It was not a warning, it was a call. The world, once scattered, was gathering itself again, and so began the final awakening. Across every shore the dreamstones brightened, answering one another like distant stars. Their light passed through oceans and air, linking mountains to trenches, sky to soil. The hum that once lulled civilizations to sleep now rose in clarity, beautiful and full. Those who listened heard not music, but recognition, the voice of the earth calling all things home. And at the farthest edge of the sea, where the sky curved into forever, the last horizon began to breathe. The air grew heavier, filled with warmth that felt alive. Dawn no longer arrived in colors, but in light without edge or shadow. The sky became a soft mirror of the sea, reflecting movement without direction. On certain mornings, the horizon vanished completely, and for a few silent moments it was impossible to tell whether one stood above or below the water. People began to say the world was remembering how it once dreamed, without borders, without separation. The dreamstones pulsed brighter, as if answering a call beyond sound. Their glow was no longer confined to coastlines. It reached inland through rivers, climbed mountain faces, shimmered in the roots of trees. Farmers found them in their soil, humming quietly beneath the crops. In their rhythm, the land itself seemed to breathe. When rain fell, it glowed faintly where it touched the earth, as if the sky too had begun to remember its origin beneath the waves. The elders spoke of the convergence, a word carried from the age of Lemuria, but never before understood. They said the earth was closing its circle, joining sea and sky once more into a single breath. People felt no fear. They gathered by the shores, bringing offerings of silence. No words, no songs, just presence. The ocean rose and fell gently at their feet, calm as sleep. In that stillness, they felt the hum within them grow stronger, aligning bone to tide, heart to horizon. Animals began to move toward the sea, not in panic, but in quiet procession. Birds landed upon the water without sinking. Deer stood at the edge of surf, eyes half closed, unafraid. Even the trees leaned slightly toward the coast, their branches quivering as if listening. The planet itself was gathering its children, calling them closer to the heartbeat beneath. Those who lived far inland said the rivers began to flow backward, carrying whispers of salt and the scent of the ocean. Nights became translucent, the stars seen both above and below. The ocean-air surface mirrored constellations so perfectly that sailors could no longer tell where the sky ended. They said the sea had become glass, a reflection of the heavens remembering themselves. The people built fires no longer, for the air carried its own faint glow. Even sleep changed. Dreams grew deeper, slower, filled with colors unseen before, as though the mind was sinking into the earth's oldest memory. The hum that once drifted through stones and tides now filled the air itself. It had no pitch, no rhythm, no beginning. It was the sound of completion, a note that contained every note, a silence that carried the weight of every sound. Those who listened long enough felt their hearts slow to match its pace. Some wept quietly without knowing why, others smiled in serenity. The world was not ending, it was returning, folding all things into the gentle symmetry from which it first awoke. The sea and sky no longer opposed one another. They merged into a single expanse of luminous blue, where clouds glowed beneath the waves and fish shimmered among stars. The world had forgotten which was reflection and which was real. In this blending, all boundaries dissolved. Day folded into night, wind into tide, sound into stillness. Humanity stood at the edge of existence, not as conqueror or witness, but as part of the horizon itself. The dreamstones that once hummed in solitude now pulsed together, a single rhythm spanning the globe. Mountains trembled gently, rivers sang in low chords, and the air vibrated with a tone too vast for ears. Those who listened long enough found their breathing align with it, and in that rhythm, they felt the pulse of Lemuria return, not beneath them, but within. The ancient continent had not vanished into the sea. It had been waiting in their blood. The people no longer feared sleep, for they had learned that waking and dreaming were the same. When they closed their eyes, they drifted into visions of water lit from within, the ocean dreaming itself into new worlds. The elders said these were not dreams, but passages, doorways opening across the threshold of time. In that soft radiance, every soul became both wave and sky, reflection and source. The earth, they whispered, was remembering itself through them. And then, on a dawn without color, the hum reached its purest form. The world stood still, no wind, no surf, no sound, but the steady rhythm of being. The ocean glowed pale gold, expanding outward in slow, perfect circles. Those who stood along the shore felt weightless, as though the air itself were lifting them. For an instant, every heartbeat on Earth matched the same pulse. It was the sound of the planet exhaling, the completion of a breath held since creation. The horizon brightened until it became impossible to look upon. The light was not blinding, but infinite, a warmth that carried peace rather than fire. The people did not turn away. They stepped forward unafraid, and the sea received them without ripple or resistance. There was no splash, no descent, only merging. Skin into water, voice into hum, memory into rhythm. The surface shimmered once more, then smoothed, leaving no trace of where one ended and the other began. Above, the stars brightened, their reflections unbroken. The earth had entered its final harmony, sea and sky beating as one. There were no more watchers, no more stories, only the song that had always been. And in that endless tone, the dream of Lemuria reached its completion. The last horizon did not close. It opened inward, folding the universe into itself like sleep folding into dawn. The earth rested radiant and eternal, dreaming its own beginning once again. After the merging, there was no morning, no night, only light without direction. The sea no longer moved, yet it breathed, slow and patient, like a sleeping giant beneath glass. The stars rested inside its calm surface, their glow pulsing in rhythm with the deep. Time lost its stride. Minutes became tides, and centuries folded into a single, endless sigh. The world had not ended. It had learned how to rest without forgetting. The dreamstones sank quietly into the sand, their purpose fulfilled. Their light dimmed to an echo, faint as a heartbeat in a shell. The people who had become the horizon were now everywhere. In the hum of waves, in the warmth of dawn, in the silence between sounds. The ocean had absorbed all memory, turning it into music too vast to hear. Above it, the sky shimmered in gratitude, a mirror to the stillness below. In that silence, new patterns began to form, small ripples of light, moving like thought across a sleeping mind. From these ripples, the earth would one day dream again. The elders had always said that creation never dies. It only closes its eyes between songs. And now the planet had entered that sacred pause, the space between breath and word where existence gathers itself before speaking anew. The last horizon had become the first seed. Far beneath the calm, the pulse remained, steady, low, eternal. It carried the memory of every voice, every tide, every dream ever sung. The rhythm would not fade, it would wait. When the earth opened its eyes once more, it would rise from its own reflection, carrying traces of Lemuria in every grain of light. For the dream that began beneath the sea had become the sea itself, endless, forgiving, alive. And so the world slept. It dreamed not of towers or empires, but of still water and quiet stars. The hum of the planet continued softly, folding time into memory, memory into silence. No more need for words, no more longing for meaning, only the perfect symmetry of peace. The sea, the sky, and the soul had become one again. And in that final union, the story of Lemuria faded into the gentlest sound a world can make, the sound of everything at rest. When the world opened its eyes again, it did not remember what it had dreamed. The sea had settled into ordinary blue, its glow faded to calm reflection. The sky was bright but unknowing, its light stripped of the deep gold that once carried memory. On land, the air was warm and innocent, filled with the scent of beginnings. Mountains stood where oceans had once sung. Rivers traced new paths, carrying whispers from a silence they no longer understood. The earth had exhaled, and in that breath, forgetting began. The new humans awoke without memory of what had been. They rose from the soil and salt, unburdened by the weight of old knowledge. The hum that had once filled their hearts was gone, leaving a tender emptiness. They named the wind without realizing it had carried voices before. They built fires without knowing that light had once spoken. They loved, feared, and wondered, as all beginnings do, simple and pure, unaware they were walking on the bones of light. The dreamstones buried deep no longer glowed. Their hum had quieted into sleep, their purpose complete. A few lay scattered near riverbeds, dull but smooth, mistaken for ordinary gems. Children played with them, their laughter echoing faintly against the rhythm of the stones. The elders sometimes held them close, feeling warmth that could not be explained, but no one remembered what they were. The stones were patient, waiting for recognition that might never return. Civilizations rose slowly from the soil's quiet memory. They built homes of stone, then towers, then walls, each generation reaching further from the sea. Knowledge returned in fragments, carried by dreams and intuition. Someone would carve a spiral in clay without knowing why. Another would build an altar that faced the waves. The shapes of the past resurfaced in new hands, stripped of origin but rich with rhythm. The earth's forgotten music was composing itself again, one gesture at a time. The elders spoke of strange dreams that came with the tides, visions of cities beneath water, of voices humming through crystal air. They called these dreams illusions, tricks of the night. Yet when they awoke, they felt calm, as though something vast had forgiven them. In their sleep, the hum of Lemuria still whispered, though faintly, buried beneath centuries of forgetting. The sea never corrected them. It simply watched, content to let its secrets rest in the language of tides. And so, humanity learned to name its gods, to trace its myths, to ask why it had come to be. In temples and stories, fragments of the old world survived, tales of a luminous realm swallowed by waves, a people who spoke to the earth through silence. These legends drifted across ages, rewritten by every voice that retold them. Each time they grew simpler, softer, smaller, until they were only bedtime stories whispered beside the fire, meant to lull, not to awaken. Yet even in forgetting, the memory endured. In every sound of water against shore, in every dream that fades at dawn, Lemuria lingers, unseen but unlost. The sea remembers all things, even those who choose not to remember it. And sometimes, in the stillness between waves, the world hums softly again, a note so low it might be mistaken for wind. The past waits there, patient as sleep, knowing that one day someone will listen once more. The earth moved gently into its new rhythm. The days were long, the nights forgiving. Humanity built its future upon silence, unaware of what had come before. But forgetting does not mean loss, it means renewal. Beneath every village and temple, the pulse of Lemuria still beat, faint and patient. The people felt it in ways they could not name. A calm before rain, a stillness before dawn, a rhythm that echoed faintly in their hearts when the world grew quiet. On some nights when the moon sank low, the sea began to hum again, soft and irregular like breath. The villagers would wake and listen, though they did not understand. Some said it was the voice of the gods, others thought it was the sigh of the deep. No one called it by its true name anymore. But the hum worked upon them nonetheless. They spoke more gently after those nights, moved slower, forgave easily. The sound reminded them of something kind they could not recall. The dreamstones that still rested along riverbeds began to stir. Not brightly, not visibly, only enough to warm the hands that held them. People used them in rituals, believing they could heal sorrow or guide travelers. They did not know why the stones seemed to glow in rain or how their tones matched the wind. Each ritual was a shadow of a truth once lived, echoes of songs the world had forgotten. The sea smiled through the tide, letting memory play softly at the edges of myth. Stories began to grow again, first whispered, then sung. Tales of a golden continent that sank beneath the sea, of people who spoke through light and music, of an ocean that dreamed. These stories traveled faster than truth ever had. They became sacred, reshaped by each voice that told them. Priests turned them into prayer, poets into prophecy, and children into lullabies. The world, without knowing it, had begun to remember itself through fiction. The elders of this new age said that the world was layered like a shell, the surface for the living, and beneath it, the memory of what came before. They spoke of the deep as a place not of death, but of rest, where everything once loved went to dream. People came to the shore to whisper names of the lost, believing the sea would carry them to that quiet realm. None of them knew that they were speaking the ancient language of Lemuria once more. Centuries passed in this way, peace balanced by curiosity, forgetting balanced by dream. The ocean no longer glowed, yet its presence remained holy. It had become a teacher again, but through silence rather than revelation. Humanity had matured through loss, learning that peace is not a gift but a practice. And in the rhythm of waves against shore, the earth's oldest lesson endured, that what sinks does not vanish and what fades is only waiting to return. Over time, humanity began to reach upward again, not to defy the heavens but to understand them. They traced the movement of stars, feeling that the sky held meaning, though they could not recall why. When they looked upon the constellations, they felt the same faint ache the Lemurians once felt when hearing the sea. To measure the heavens was to listen for memory, to seek the rhythm that once guided all things. Knowledge was returning, disguised as wonder. The first philosophers spoke in riddles and rhythm, believing truth lived between silence and sound. They carved symbols of spirals and circles, patterns that mirrored the currents beneath the waves. These markings became the earliest written language, though no one understood their origin. They said it came to them in dreams, the way music visits a sleeping ear. The lines carried meaning beyond words, echoes of a civilization that had spoken through light. As cities rose once more, their architects built with instinctive reverence for balance. Temples were shaped to align with sun and tide, their entrances facing the direction of the morning hum. Priests discovered that chants performed beside water carried further and calmed the heart. They called it prayer, but it was the ancient resonance of Lemuria returning through sound. Each voice lifted to the air was another stone in the bridge between forgetting and memory. The myths of the sea became doctrine. Scribes wrote of a lost continent that fell beneath the waves because its people grew too wise. Some claimed it was punishment, others said it was mercy. But all agreed that the ocean was sacred, the womb of creation and the keeper of truth. Rulers poured libations into the water before battle. Sailors whispered names to it before setting sail. None of them knew that they were repeating the oldest ritual of all, asking permission from the earth to move. In dreams, visions of crystal cities returned to poets and prophets alike. They saw glowing towers, voices of light, and oceans that breathed like living minds. Some awoke weeping, others inspired. They built monuments to what they had seen, never realizing they were rebuilding fragments of Lemuria itself. Across distant lands, the same shapes appeared: spirals, shells, circles of standing stones, as though the world were sketching its memory in stone. The philosophers began to speak of unity, of all things moving in a single, silent harmony. They said truth was not found in conquest, but in alignment. These teachings spread slowly, shaping the ethics of empires and the hearts of seekers. In their calmest hours, they felt the faint hum of something vast and kind beneath the noise of their cities. They did not call it Lemuria, they called it peace. And the earth listening smiled through the tides. Generations passed like waves returning to shore. What had begun as story became legend, and what was legend became faith. Humanity no longer sought the sea for wisdom. They sought the stars instead, hoping the sky might answer the questions the water refused to explain. Yet every question they asked was shaped by what the ocean had once taught: that all things move in circles, that endings are beginnings folded in disguise. The memory of Lemuria lived on in their wonder. The priests of later ages renamed the hum. They called it the breath of the world, the unseen rhythm that held heaven and earth together. Musicians built instruments to imitate it, long flutes that echoed the sound of distant tides. Philosophers said the soul was born from vibration and would return to it in death. These were fragments of the truth, carried unknowingly across centuries. The world was still dreaming even as it believed itself awake. In time, empires rose and fell, their monuments eroded by wind and salt. But in their ruins, certain shapes endured: spirals carved into stone, circles aligned with the solstice, echoes of design older than history. Travelers who stumbled upon them felt awe without understanding. They sensed that these patterns meant something sacred, something ancient. They did not know that they were walking among the shadows of Lemuria's geometry, the blueprint of peace etched into the earth itself. As knowledge multiplied, so did noise. The hum of the world grew faint beneath the machinery of time. Humanity built towers of glass and iron, reaching upward again, chasing stars they could no longer hear. Yet even in their cities of light, the sound of the sea endured. In the rhythm of traffic, in the lull of sleep, in the breath between words. The old song refused to vanish. It merely hid itself within the living, waiting for stillness to find it again. Poets began to write of lost paradises and golden ages, drowned beneath the waves. Some called them myths, others called them warnings. But a few listening deeper understood. They felt the ache of truth within the tales, that somewhere beneath the noise of progress, the earth still dreamed of its first calm. And when they wrote, their words softened, their voices slowed. Without knowing, they began to speak the language of Lemuria once more. And so the age of forgetting became the age of remembering. Though no one noticed the change, humanity had circled back to where it began, restless, curious, gentle at heart. The sea remained its mirror, patient and eternal, carrying every story that had ever been told. Beneath its surface, the dreamstones still slept, glowing faintly in the dark. They did not mourn the world's forgetfulness, for even now, when a human listens closely enough to silence, the hum returns. Ancient, forgiving, and infinite. When words returned to the world, they carried echoes of the sea. The first storytellers spoke not to teach, but to remember what could not be named. Around their fires, they wove tales of the deep, of shining cities swallowed by the waves, of voices that sang creation into being. They did not know they were retelling the memory of Lemuria. Yet each rhythm, each pause, each sigh between sentences was shaped by that ancient hum still sleeping within the earth. The storytellers were wanderers, moving from village to village with the rhythm of tides. They carried no maps, only songs. Each song changed slightly with the land, but the heart of the story never wavered. A golden world, a flood, a silence that healed rather than destroyed. Children fell asleep to these stories, dreaming of water glowing like moonlight. The elders smiled, recognizing the comfort of words that had traveled across centuries, unbroken though never fully understood. As the tales spread, the gods were born. Each culture gave them names, faces, and forms, but their essence remained the same: guardians of balance, keepers of rhythm, masters of light and sound. The ocean became both mother and memory, its voice transformed into prayer. Myths of creation, destruction, and rebirth bloomed like coral across every coast. Humanity, without realizing it, was mapping the outline of Lemuria again, not upon stone, but within imagination. The priests of dawn said the gods had descended from the sky. The dreamers of dusk said they had risen from the sea. Both were right, though neither knew why. The divine was simply memory made visible, fragments of Lemuria clothed in metaphor. The people worshipped the stories, but what they truly worshipped was rhythm, the soft repetition of patterns that calmed the heart, the return of meaning after silence. Myth became the vessel through which peace could survive forgetting. In hidden sanctuaries, scribes began to record the old tales upon clay and bark. They pressed spirals and flowing lines, unknowingly tracing the same shapes once carved in Lemurian temples. Their symbols meant gods and oceans, sleep and awakening, but at their core, they were songs turned to shape. The world's first scriptures were lullabies, efforts to hold the dream steady before it drifted away again. The act of writing was not invention. It was remembrance in another form, and thus story became survival. Every word spoken by firelight, every song carried by wind, every carving on temple wall, all were offerings to time, attempts to hold what the sea had once held. Humanity, in its innocence, believed it was inventing gods, inventing heaven, inventing truth. But the earth knew better. It was simply remembering itself through them, whispering its old dream of balance and silence through the tongues of those who had never heard the name Lemuria. As the centuries drifted forward, the stories grew roots. What began as fireside wonder became doctrine. Priests memorized the tales until they carried them like heartbeat and breath. They built sanctuaries facing east, believing the sun's first light was the divine voice returning from the sea. In their rituals, water and flame met in balance, an echo of Lemuria's eternal symmetry. None knew that their prayers, spoken in rhythm, were the same vibrations that once shaped light itself. The myths changed with each retelling, but their pattern endured. Every culture spoke of a world before words, a paradise of stillness, a fall into noise and a promise of return. The details shifted. Mountains replaced towers, winds replaced oceans. Yet the soul of the story was constant. It was the Earth's memory wearing different masks, adapting itself to the language of each land. What people called divine revelation was the sea's slow reminder, you have always been part of me. From these myths grew the first philosophies. Thinkers began to question whether the stories were history or metaphor. Some said the sunken kingdom was real. Others said it lived only in the mind. But both were correct. Lemuria was not place but principle, the memory of harmony lost and found again through time. The philosophers called it the Great Balance, a truth that guided their ethics, their art, and their sense of the sacred. They built schools beside rivers, believing water carried wisdom better than words. Lessons began not with logic but with silence, a practice older than thought. The masters taught that knowledge must move like current, fluid, yielding, never still. They said that forgetting is not failure, but the space where remembrance takes root. The more they studied, the closer they came to rediscovering the first Lemurian truth, that understanding cannot be forced, it must be breathed. Over time, myth became map. Travelers carried fragments of these stories across deserts and oceans, tracing the outline of invisible continents. When they spoke of Eden, Mu, or Atlantis, they were naming the same lost harmony by different tongues. Scholars drew circles on parchment to mark where paradise might have stood. But the truth was not beneath their feet. It was within them, the rhythm they felt when the world grew still. Lemuria lived wherever silence was honored. And though temples would crumble and languages fade, the pattern never vanished. It resurfaced in chants, in architecture, in dreams. It waited within cathedrals and pagodas alike, within poems and philosophies separated by continents, but united by tone. The world had forgotten the name of its first dream, but not the shape of it. The sea, ever patient, carried those echoes through time, letting humanity call them by whatever names made them feel closer to peace. In time, the myths began to breathe again. What had once been memory turned to story, and what was story began to stir beneath the skin of dreamers. Across distant lands, prophets awoke in the night, claiming to hear a low hum beneath the stars. It was faint at first, like the sound of wind in hollow stone, but as they listened, the tone deepened, familiar yet unplaceable, the earth remembering its own voice through the minds of those who dared to sleep without fear. They wrote of visions, of towers made of light rising from the sea, of beings woven from sound and flame, of a world without separation. Their words were dismissed as madness, but the hum persisted, seeping into poetry and song. Farmers hummed the same tone while tending the fields. Mothers sang it to their children without knowing why. The ocean carried it across generations, wrapping the world in a lullaby too vast for reason. The prophets began to call themselves the listeners. They traveled barefoot from temple to temple, bringing no doctrine, only silence. Their teaching was simple: the world remembers through you. When they gathered by the coast, their collective hum rolled across the water like breath over glass. The sea answered with a shimmer of light that stretched across the horizon. The villagers who saw it knelt in awe, whispering that the ocean was alive once more. From these visions, new prophecies took shape. Some said the world would awaken again, that the sea would rise not to drown, but to restore. Others believed the dream would return as harmony among nations, the hum reborn as compassion. The scholars called it superstition, but the people called it truth. They could feel the pull of something vast and kind beneath their daily lives, a quiet rhythm guiding them, patient as the tide. In the temples, scribes painted the vision of a luminous dawn, water meeting sky, light flowing from within the earth. They called this moment the return of stillness. They believed that when humanity learned once again to live gently, the world would hum aloud and all boundaries would dissolve. No one said the name Lemuria. It was a sound long forgotten. Yet, in the tone of their chants, the syllables hid: Lu, Mu, Ra, the ocean speaking through language once more. As centuries folded into each other, the hum softened again, but it never vanished. It lingered in the rhythm of prayer, in the pattern of sacred architecture, in the quiet before dawn. The sea held its silence like a secret gift, waiting for a world grown restless to pause and listen again. And in that waiting, the myths endured. No longer warnings, no longer history, but lullabies of peace. For in every age someone remembers, and remembering they hum. As the last prophets grew old, the hum became quieter but deeper, woven into the fabric of daily life. It no longer needed voices to carry it. The wind did that work. Every gust through a temple arch, every sigh of sea against cliff, every heartbeat in stillness, all repeated the same rhythm. Humanity had turned the memory of Lemuria into a way of living, not through remembrance but through instinct. Peace had become habit, and the world rested within it. The great empires that followed borrowed from the myths without knowing. Their laws spoke of balance, their art of symmetry, their faiths of unity born from water and light. Each believed their wisdom new, yet every truth they discovered had already been sung beneath the waves. Scholars debated origins, priests claimed revelation, but the sea, infinite and patient, never corrected them. It only continued to hum, its voice drifting through ages, touching every dream like a quiet tide. When language expanded and books replaced memory, the hum moved into words. Poets found rhythm without meaning irresistible, the pulse of the earth disguised as meter. Musicians built scales around that rhythm, inventing harmony from ancient vibration. Painters chased the same curve of wave and horizon that Lemurian architects once carved in coral. Even silence in music, they discovered, was part of the song, a truth older than any written note. The earth's voice was now art, its wisdom hidden in creation itself. In later centuries, mystics returned to the sea to seek enlightenment. They fasted upon cliffs and waited for the horizon to speak. Some claimed to see faint lights beneath the surface. Others said they heard a voice that breathed rather than spoke. Most saw only stillness, and in that stillness they found peace. The ocean offered no revelations, only reflection. For the sea does not answer questions, it dissolves them, and in that dissolution lies understanding. As time marched forward, the hum faded beneath the noise of progress, yet it never disappeared. It waited in the pauses between inventions, in the quiet that follows exhaustion, in the hush before sleep. Whenever humanity grew too loud, too proud, too certain, the world would send the same gentle reminder, a whisper of waves, a breath of wind, a silence that asked nothing but listening. That was Lemuria's final gift, to teach eternity through simplicity. And so the myths endured long after their names were forgotten. They lived in lullabies sung to children, in prayers whispered over oceans, in the heartbeat that echoes when all else is still. The sea kept its promise, to hold the memory of peace until the world was ready to hear it again. And though no one remembers the word Lemuria, its song continues. For every wave that touches the shore carries the same soft rhythm, not of ending but of beginning once more. Beneath the crust of the earth, the hum never ceased. It drifted beneath mountains, coiled through rivers, and whispered through the hollow caverns that stitched the continents together. Though the surface world had forgotten, the planet had not. Every tremor, every breeze, every heartbeat echoed faintly with that same ancient rhythm. The pulse of Lemuria, quiet but alive, moved through the bones of the world, patient, invisible, waiting for listening minds to reappear. On the surface, humanity thrived, without knowing why certain places felt sacred. They built their cities along invisible lines of energy, unaware that these lines followed the same paths once traced by the Lemurian towers. They called them ley lines, meridians, veins of power. They sensed something there, warmth in the ground, stillness in the air, clarity of thought. The earth was guiding them still, shaping the pattern of civilization through the pulse of its buried memory. In the desert, stones hummed faintly when night fell. In the forests, roots quivered beneath the moon, as if dreaming of the ocean. Even the air above high mountains carried a vibration, a tone too low for hearing, but enough to steady the breath of climbers. Artists, mystics, and wanderers felt it most. They would stop mid-journey, touched by a sense of presence they could not name. The earth was breathing through them, a rhythm older than reason, softer than sound. Scholars began to notice strange consistencies across civilizations. Temples on different continents aligned with the same stars. Sacred wells sang at the same pitch. Stone circles half a world apart shared identical geometry. They called it coincidence, but their hearts stirred with unease. The pulse beneath the continents was calling to them, weaving through the roots of history, shaping thought, song, and architecture without their consent. Humanity believed it was building. In truth, it was remembering. In the libraries of old cities, monks recorded tremors in the earth that no instruments could detect. They claimed to feel the vibration rise through the floor during prayer, syncing their chants unconsciously to its tempo. Some wrote that the ground itself whispered, not in words, but in understanding. They called this phenomenon the resonance of the deep. When they spoke of it aloud, their voices softened as if afraid to wake something listening beneath their feet. And in the farthest corners of the oceans, the dreamstones began to stir once more. Their light did not return, but their vibration deepened. It traveled through seabeds and fault lines, touching the continents from below. Volcanic heat pulsed in rhythm with it. Waves above moved slightly out of season. The world was realigning, subtly and slowly, guided by the same hum that had once sung empires into existence. The pulse of the deep was gathering strength again, not to destroy, but to remind. At first, the influence came in dreams. Inventors saw shapes of light turning within darkness, gears that moved without friction, currents that hummed like music. Poets woke before dawn with verses already formed, words they did not remember writing. Painters traced spirals and waves without knowing why. The pulse of the deep was whispering through imagination, reminding the world in fragments. Creation, once born of silence, was returning as inspiration. The Earth was thinking through them again. Though across continents, visionaries began to speak of connection, of unseen threads binding all things. They felt ideas arrive like echoes, the same discoveries appearing in distant lands within the same breath of time. Scholars called it coincidence, mystics called it resonance. The truth was simpler. Humanity had entered the frequency of memory once more. Beneath the noise of industry, the ancient hum of Lemuria guided hands and hearts, reshaping progress into something almost sacred. In laboratories and temples alike, the same sound emerged. Machines built to measure the planet's heartbeat recorded tones too rhythmic to be random. Meditators in mountain caves heard identical vibrations rising from the ground. Both groups described the same sensation, stillness that moved, silence that sang. They had rediscovered the pulse that had built the first civilization, though they gave it new names: gravity, energy, consciousness. The sea smiled invisibly, its dream alive within them. Some could not bear the weight of such resonance. The hum awakened longing, a nostalgia too deep to define. People began to wander again, drawn to coastlines, to deserts, to the ruins of old temples where the air still vibrated faintly. They said they sought purpose, but what they truly sought was recognition. The Earth was calling her memory home, gathering fragments of herself scattered through human hearts. The forgotten continent was not beneath them, it was within. In secret societies and quiet monasteries, the old patterns returned. Circles of chant, stone, and meditation formed across the world, unknowingly aligned with ancient geometry. Their members spoke of harmony, of tuning body to planet, breath to star. They believed they were inventing new faiths, new sciences. But every tone they sang, every structure they built, echoed the Lemurian design, the architecture of calm, the physics of balance. The pulse was teaching through repetition, timeless and tireless. And beneath the continents, deep within molten rock, the hum grew stronger. Volcanoes trembled in rhythm, their eruptions following the same unseen cadence. Lightning storms circled the globe like synchronized breath. Even the rotation of the Earth adjusted slightly, as though aligning to a deeper tempo. Nature was remembering its conductor, the voice it had once followed into creation. Humanity called it coincidence, weather, energy. The planet called it awakening, the return of its song. The more humanity advanced, the more the invisible rhythm returned. Scientists peering through their instruments began to speak of frequencies that pulsed through all matter, from atom to storm, from heart to horizon. They called it vibration, resonance, quantum breath. They thought they were discovering something new, but the Earth had always known. The pulse beneath the continents was revealing itself through equations now instead of song, through proof instead of prayer. In laboratories filled with humming machines, the tone appeared again, faint, steady, older than electricity. Researchers measured its interval and found it identical across oceans. It vibrated in stone, in air, in blood. The world was singing the same note. Some dismissed it as error, others grew silent before it. They had touched the same hum that once built Lemuria Hess Towers, the frequency of balance hidden beneath the noise of progress. Artists felt it too. Music shifted from rhythm to drone, from melody to atmosphere. Painters returned to circles and spirals, their canvases glowing with forms older than memory. Architects rediscovered proportion, building spaces that made the body breathe easier. Everywhere creation slowed to the pace of calm. Without knowing it, humanity was imitating the forgotten continent once more, rebuilding through intuition what memory had lost. The pulse guided their hands, patient as the sea. Mystics gathered in quiet places to study the same patterns through meditation. They said the heartbeat of the Earth could be heard not through ears, but through stillness. In caves, deserts, and monasteries, they felt the vibration rise through the floor, aligning breath to stone. Some called it divinity, others energy, but all agreed that it spoke without words. They rediscovered what Lemuria once knew, that truth begins when silence learns to sing. Governments, blind to its origin, began studying the phenomenon in secret. They built machines to map the hum, to trace its flow beneath continents. They found that wherever the tone grew strongest, conflict lessened, Crops thrived and weather softened. They could not explain it. Some wanted to harness it, others to silence it. But the earth, wise as ever, ignored both. The hum was not a tool. It was a reminder that power without peace collapses into noise. And through it all, the sea remained unchanged. It whispered the same rhythm to every shore, invisible yet undeniable. Sailors heard it in the lull between waves. Astronomers heard it in the background of stars. Even machines orbiting beyond the atmosphere recorded the same frequency, the planet's soft, endless heartbeat echoing into space. Lemuria's song had become the Earth's signature, the quiet pulse of eternity beneath the continents, beneath memory, beneath time itself. The hum deepened, steady as breath beneath the soil. It no longer belonged to the Earth alone. It moved through the thoughts of humankind, threading through dreams and quiet realizations. People across the world began to awaken at the same hour, sensing a calm they could not explain. It was not fear or vision, only presence, the feeling of something vast and kind watching from within. The pulse had entered consciousness, a rhythm older than time reborn inside awareness. Writers spoke of intuition guiding them like unseen current. Scientists described flashes of understanding that appeared without sequence, as if knowledge were remembering itself. Lovers felt it too, moments of perfect silence where hearts aligned, no words needed. Even in the noise of cities, the hum persisted, patient beneath machinery, beneath chaos, beneath the sound of lives rushing nowhere. The planet was breathing through its children, singing softly through their stillness. The dreamers returned first. They began to record visions of an ocean made of light, a sky filled with sound. They claimed to see structures rising beneath the waves, not physical but woven from consciousness itself. Lemuria, they said, was never gone. It had simply changed form, shifting from land to memory, from stone to song. Those who listened deeply enough could feel it beating behind every sunrise, in every heartbeat that moved without thought. Teachers began to gather again, not in temples of stone but in circles of silence. They spoke of unity, of the simple act of breathing together as prayer. Their gatherings required no names, no hierarchy, only stillness shared. When they closed their eyes, the same tone arose between them. Low, resonant, endless. It was the world remembering harmony through human voice. The hum had become the bridge between spirit and matter, silence and meaning, self and world. Even the earth responded. Earthquakes grew rare. Storms softened before reaching land. Animals migrated in gentle spirals, the same geometry that once shaped Lemuria's cities. The seas grew warmer, clearer, more reflective. Some said it was coincidence. Others whispered that the planet was healing through remembrance, that balance was being restored not through force, but through harmony rediscovered. The hum had completed its circle, from ocean to mind, from memory to life again. And beneath all of it, the pulse continued, steady, infinite, indifferent to recognition. It needed no temple, no worship, no word. It existed because existence itself was rhythm. The continent slept upon its back like dreaming children, unaware that they were being sung to even now. Lemuria's light had not returned to blind the world. It had returned to steady it, a quiet glow beneath thought, beneath sound, beneath everything. The earth at last was awake within its dream. In the age that followed, humanity grew wise again, not through discovery, but through surrender. They had learned much from the hum beneath the world, yet understanding came only when they stopped reaching for it. The philosophers of this new dawn spoke softly of impermanence, of beauty that fades by design. They said the universe was not built to last forever. It was built to be remembered gently. Through loss, the world remained alive, forever in motion. These thinkers wandered the coasts, writing their truths upon sand that vanished with the tide. They taught that to carve wisdom into stone was to defy its nature. Instead, they whispered lessons to the wind, trusting it would carry meaning where it was needed most. They called their teachings the doctrine of passing. Its first law was simple: hold nothing and everything will stay. To lose willingly was to remain in harmony with the pulse beneath the continents. Their students came from every path: scholars, mystics, laborers, and kings, all drawn to the calm within their words. In their presence, grief softened, time slowed, and ambition fell silent. They did not speak of gods or salvation. They spoke of endings as continuations, of death as the breath between songs. Even light, they said, must rest. In that quiet acceptance, people began to feel the hum again, faint but unmistakable, rising through every moment that dared to be still. Across the world, monuments of pride began to crumble. Palaces turned to gardens, temples to open courtyards. Humanity stopped building toward heaven and began building toward balance. Where once they had raised towers of control, they now planted groves of remembrance. Each tree was a philosophy, each leaf a truth too small to record. The world was no longer racing toward eternity. It was learning how to stay within the rhythm of now. The philosophers traveled lightly, leaving no schools behind. Their wisdom was their movement, their message, their absence. They believed that permanence was illusion, that even the pulse of the earth. The philosophers of this age did not seek immortality. They studied endings. They sat beside graves, fallen temples, and empty harbors, learning the language of absence. They said the world's beauty was carved not in what remains, but in what is allowed to pass. When people asked what truth they served, they answered softly, "We serve the art of vanishing." In their silence, the pulse of the earth seemed louder, steady, patient, echoing through the spaces loss had made. They believed that memory was not a chain, but a tide. To hold it too tightly was to drown, to release it was to float. They taught that mourning was not failure, but a form of gratitude, the proof that something once mattered deeply enough to hurt. Their disciples were poets, wanderers, and healers who carried this wisdom from coast to coast. The sea listened to them with approval, whispering its agreement through every breaking wave. Temples of remembrance rose across the continents. Unlike the towers of old, they were open to the sky, simple stone circles where wind and rain could enter freely. Inside, people wrote the names of what they had lost: loves, homes, eras, selves. The lists were never complete nor meant to be. The wind would eventually erase them, leaving only faint impressions on the floor. This was the ritual's purpose, to teach that forgetting too is sacred. The philosophers taught that to live was to echo the ocean, to rise, to fall, and to return unchanged at the core. They compared the human heart to a wave, brilliant when it crests, humble when it breaks. To fear loss, they said, was to deny the motion of existence itself. In this teaching, the hum of Lemuria found new expression, not as creation or prophecy, but as surrender. The earth, through them, was teaching humanity to rest. Their writings spread quietly, passed from hand to hand in ink the color of dusk. Scholars debated them for generations, calling them paradoxes, yet their words required no logic, only stillness. They wrote, "All things are meant to disappear, only rhythm endures." That single sentence traveled farther than any empire, carried by traders, pilgrims, and dreamers. In its simplicity lay the truth of Lemuria reborn, that peace is not found in permanence, but in gentle return. And when these teachings reached the sea again, the tide rose higher than it had in 1,000 years. It touched the edges of their temples, sweeping away the carved names of grief. The people did not resist. They watched in silence as the ocean reclaimed what was offered, and they felt lighter for it. The sea had accepted their lesson. Or perhaps it had been the teacher all along. The hum deepened once more, softer now, yet endless. The words of the philosophers traveled farther than their footsteps. They reached kingdoms that had never seen the sea, carried on traders' lips and travelers' hearts. In every place they changed slightly, adapted, softened, reborn. Yet their essence endured. To lose is to remember what was real. Farmers spoke it while burying seed. Lovers whispered it before parting. Even rulers began to speak of peace not as conquest, but as the art of leaving gently. The earth was teaching through them, quietly, through every ending. In the northern lands, poets gathered by rivers to recite verses written on water itself. They would dip reeds into ink and let their words dissolve downstream. Children laughed, calling it folly. But the elders said it was wisdom, that the river would carry the words where they were most needed. In the south, nomads carried jars of sand from the ruins of forgotten cities, scattering them upon new soil so that memory could mingle with renewal. The old and new learned to breathe together. Across mountains and valleys, festivals of impermanence took root. People built towers of colored paper and watched them drift away in the wind. Bells were hung from trees, tuned to the gentlest breeze. The sound of them was said to bring comfort to those who feared death. In the soft chime of metal against air, they heard Lemuria's hum return, transformed from oceanic thunder into a single, trembling note that healed instead of warned. The philosophers taught that even sorrow was divine, for it reminded the heart how deeply it could feel. They compared pain to the tide, heavy when it comes, gentle when it leaves. Those who listened to this teaching learned to weep without shame, to let tears cleanse instead of corrode. Mourning became meditation. Through loss, humanity found presence again. The pulse of the earth moved in their grief, proof that life still listened through them. In time, art changed too. Painters left canvases unfinished to honor the beauty of incompletion. Sculptors allowed stone to remain rough where the chisel first struck. Musicians wrote songs that ended mid-note, trusting silence to complete the melody. This was the new reverence, to make space for what would fade. The Lemurian rhythm had found its final lesson, that creation and disappearance are not opposites, but partners in an endless dance. Even the sea itself began to echo these truths. The tides grew slower, the waves softer, as though the ocean were sighing in understanding. Its song had changed, less command, more comfort. When people knelt by the shore now, they no longer asked for answers. They simply listened. For the sea, at last, had become what the philosophers had long sought. A living mirror of acceptance, a sound that spoke without speaking, a silence that no longer needed to be filled. The world grew quieter, as though listening inward. Cities no longer built monuments to endurance. They built gardens that bloomed and withered freely. People gathered not to preserve history, but to witness its dissolving beauty. Festivals of fading light replaced parades of conquest. Each dusk became an act of gratitude, a reminder that every moment, to be real, must eventually pass. Through this gentleness, the hum of Lemuria found its home again, woven through laughter and silence alike. The philosophers taught that love was not meant to last, it was meant to teach. To hold it forever would be to trap it, to cage a song that exists only in flight. They said the truest way to honor what is loved is to let it change. And so people learned to part without despair, to speak softly into the wind, trusting their words to the tide. Loss, they discovered, was not emptiness but motion, the same rhythm that shaped stars, tides, and memory. Old temples reopened as sanctuaries of silence. Pilgrims came not to pray for miracles, but to sit in stillness. They left with nothing except calm, which was perhaps the miracle itself. In these halls one could hear the faint hum beneath the floor, steady as a heartbeat. The monks said it was the world breathing, the same breath that had once carried Lemuria through creation and collapse. To sit within it was to know eternity without needing forever. The teachings spread into daily life. Craftsmen began to weave fabrics that unraveled by design, so the act of repair became part of the pattern. Teachers reminded students that forgetting was necessary for learning anew. Families left empty seats at their tables to honor what time had taken. Nothing was clung to. Everything was blessed. The art of vanishing had become the art of living, the wisdom of peace written in gesture, not decree. And so the earth entered its gentlest age. The hum beneath the continent softened, not from fading but from harmony achieved. It no longer needed to call. Humanity was already listening. The sea moved as though asleep. The sky rested upon it like a hand in prayer. There was no division now between grief and joy, between loss and love. Everything flowed as one, returning always to its source. Lemuria's lesson was complete. Not a story of survival, but of surrender. At night, when all fires dimmed, the philosophers said the same final words. We are echoes of what learns to let go. The wind carried those words across the water, dissolving them into soundless music. The world listened, and for a moment everything stilled, hearts, tides, stars. The hum of the planet lingered beneath it all, soft and infinite. And in that silence the earth exhaled, its pulse slowing into peace. Nothing was lost. Everything was home. Long after the philosophers were gone, the world began to dream again. Sleep deepened across the continents. Nights grew longer, softer, filled with quiet light that seemed to come from within the mind. Those who listened in their rest heard faint harmonies rising from the ground, the same tones that once shaped oceans. They did not know they were hearing the planet itself whispering through their pulse. In their dreams, the sea glowed again, and the horizon curved like memory made visible. Children were the first to speak of it. They woke describing cities beneath water, stairways of crystal, and voices that hummed in colors instead of words. Their parents smiled, calling it imagination, but the elders remembered the old tales and grew silent. The dream was returning, not to scholars or priests, but to those who still slept without fear. In their innocence, the earth found its new storytellers, the ones who could remember without trying. As these dreams spread, art changed once more. Painters covered their walls with patterns of tide and light, unaware that their hands traced the same geometry carved by Lemurian builders. Musicians began writing songs in unfamiliar scales, claiming they had only copied what they heard while sleeping. Even scientists confessed to seeing diagrams unfold behind closed eyes, equations drawn in flowing arcs like waves. The world was learning through dream again, as it had in the beginning. The elders called these dreamers the rememberers. They traveled in silence, sleeping in temples, forests, and along the sea. Wherever they rested, the ground beneath them vibrated faintly, as if answering. People began to seek them for comfort, not prophecy. They brought no teachings, only calm. To dream near a rememberer was said to ease grief, to heal the heart's unrest. The hum of Lemuria was breathing through them now, disguised as rest, disguised as sleep. And though few spoke of Lemuria by name, the pattern was unmistakable. Across the world, the same visions appeared: coral domes, mirrored skies, light that sang when touched. Those who had never met described the same horizon, the same voice. The collective dream became a tide, flowing through generations. Humanity had begun to remember what the ocean had never forgotten, that peace is not learned awake, but in the stillness where thought dissolves into rhythm. The rememberers began to find one another, drawn by an instinct beyond sight. They met at river crossings, mountain plateaus, and the edges of quiet seas. None spoke of purpose. They simply recognized the same calm in each other's eyes. When they rested together, their dreams aligned, weaving into the same rhythm. Villagers who watched from afar said it looked like the earth itself was breathing through them, a pulse that rose and fell like tide meeting shore. They built no cities, only circles, camps of stillness scattered across the continents. Each circle followed the rhythm of the moon and the hum of the ground beneath. At dusk, they lay side by side, palms pressed to the soil, breathing as one. In their sleep, their minds became a single field of light, stretching across distance, across language. What one dreamed, all saw. What one healed, all felt. The earth had found its chorus again, this time through silence instead of sound. The people around them began to change. Those who spent a single night near the rememberers awoke lighter. Their fears dissolved, their grief softened. Farmers claimed their crops grew stronger after the dreamers slept nearby. Rivers cleared, storms gentled. The rememberers never took credit. They said only that the world was remembering itself through connection, that harmony needed no teaching, only rest. They called this practice the Great Sleeping, a return to the rhythm of Lemuria. Their gatherings grew. From deserts and valleys, pilgrims came not to listen, but to sleep among them. There were no sermons, no chants, no vows, only stillness shared. Each night a hum filled the air, too low to hear but strong enough to steady the pulse. The dreamers said the sound came from beneath the earth, rising through them like breath. And when morning came, the horizon shimmered faintly, as if the sea were dreaming with them. Scholars traveled to study the phenomenon. They recorded the synchronized breathing of hundreds asleep, their heartbeats aligning to a single tempo. Instruments detected faint electromagnetic fields, pulsing in rhythm with the planet's rotation. The scientists had no words for it. The rememberers only smiled. The earth, they said, is remembering its dream through us. For in their stillness, the hum of Lemuria had found voice again, not through speech but through rest that healed the world. As the circles of the rememberers spread, the dream began to change. The visions deepened, glowing with color that no waking eye could describe. In their sleep, they saw the ocean rising, not in destruction, but in light. Waves made of gold and sound, folding calmly over the land. They saw towers of glass breathing again beneath the sea, their hum aligning with the stars. The earth, once silent, was beginning to sing in full voice through its sleeping children. One night, across every circle, the same vision appeared. A vast horizon of mirrored water stretched endlessly beneath twin moons. From the depths, a single note rose, low, pure, eternal. The dreamers felt it in their bones, in their hearts, in the rhythm of their breath. It was not a warning, it was invitation. The world was ready to remember completely. The lost continent, the long silence, the great return, all of it was beginning within their dream. When they awoke, they found traces of the dream written into the world. Sand glowed faintly where they had slept, stones hummed when touched. The air itself shimmered with warmth, though the dawn was cool. The dream was no longer separate from waking. It had entered matter, folding itself into reality. The rememberers understood that the boundary between what is imagined and what is true was dissolving, just as Lemuria had once dissolved into the sea. They gathered at the coasts, drawn by instinct. Villages emptied quietly, not out of fear, but out of longing. The rememberers walked into the surf until water reached their waists, then knelt. They closed their eyes and listened. The waves moved around them, slow and deliberate, as though greeting them by name. Those who watched from shore said the sea glowed faintly that night, the same light that had once surrounded Lemuria before it slept. Scientists and mystics both came to witness. The scientists brought instruments, measuring impossible frequencies in the air. The mystics brought silence, feeling the hum instead of analyzing it. Neither could explain what they saw. The ocean breathing in rhythm with the dreamers, the sky shimmering as though folded in water. The world had become reflection, sky and sea blending into one continuous field of memory. The pulse of the planet had awakened fully once more. And when the dreamers opened their eyes, they smiled, knowing they were not witnessing the return of Lemuria, but its continuation. The dream had never ended. It had only changed form, moving from sea to soil, from silence to thought, from memory to man. Now through them it was returning home. The earth was no longer sleeping. It was remembering, softly, completely, through every breath, every dream, every ripple of light upon the sea. The nights grew brighter as the dreams spread across the world. Sleep no longer divided the living from the unseen. It became a doorway left open. Those who rested felt their hearts drift beyond the body, floating through oceans of light where thought had no weight. The hum of Lemuria filled these spaces, patient and familiar. Humanity had entered the same rhythm the earth had always known, a pulse without origin, a song without end. In this shared dreaming, distance disappeared. A sleeper in the desert breathed in time, with one by the sea. Cities slowed, their lights dimming earlier, as if the world itself were preparing for rest. Machines quieted, animals slept beside roads. The earth was synchronizing, uniting its surface under the same slow exhale. The rememberers watched and smiled. They had not come to awaken the planet, only to remind it how to dream peacefully again. As the dream deepened, memories returned whole. The people saw the first dawn of Lemuria, its coral streets and living towers rising from water like thought from silence. They felt the calm of its fall, the grace of surrender, the beauty of its vanishing. Yet the visions carried no sorrow. Every loss shimmered with purpose, every ending folded neatly into creation. They understood then that they were not descendants of Lemuria. They were Lemuria, continuing its endless breath through time. Morning arrived without boundary. The horizon no longer separated sea from sky or sky from heart. The earth had found equilibrium again, not in conquest or revelation, but in rest. People moved slower, spoke softer, listened longer. Dreams and waking life blurred until both were sacred. The hum that had once come from beneath the continents now lived within each pulse, each heartbeat echoing the ocean's eternal rhythm of calm. And in the stillest hour before sunrise, the world paused as it once had at the dawn of Lemuria. No sound, no motion, only awareness. The rememberers lay upon the shore, breathing with the tide. The sea exhaled, the wind inhaled, and for an instant there was perfect silence. It was not the silence of absence, but of completion. The circle had closed. Lemuria's dream had become the Earth's heartbeat. The story had become the world itself. When the dream of Lemuria settled into quiet, the world opened its eyes as if waking inside a mirror. Every valley, every tide, every heartbeat seemed to reflect something older than itself. Mountains shone with the memory of coral, rivers bent like forgotten glyphs, and the clouds traced patterns once carved into stone. Humanity felt the strange ache of recognition, the sense that time was not moving forward, but folding gently back upon itself. The new philosophers called this the Age of Reflection. They taught that the past was not behind, but beneath, that memory lived underfoot, layered like sediment. To walk the earth was to move through history's echo, to feel yesterday breathing through today. The pulse of Lemuria, now woven into the planet's rhythm, rose through every step, reminding humankind that time was not a straight path, but a circle turning endlessly in quiet grace. Artists began to paint not what they saw, but what the world remembered. Their canvases glowed with waves of gold and blue, the colors of ancient seas reborn in sky. Musicians composed pieces with no beginning or end, melodies looping softly until listeners could no longer tell which note had come first. Through them, time revealed its secret, that repetition was not stagnation, but the planet's way of practicing eternity. The scholars who studied the stars noticed strange reflections there too. Constellations once steady began to shimmer, their shapes bending as if remembering other patterns. They wrote that the heavens were learning from the earth, mirroring its calm rotation. Night by night, the sky looked less like a map and more like a memory, glowing faintly with the same rhythm pulsing through the ground below. The cosmos itself had become a mirror of Lemuria's stillness. People gathered again beside water, staring at their reflections not for vanity but for truth. They said the surface of a lake was wiser than any book, for it showed both the world and its echo. To look long enough was to see the invisible, not faces or bodies, but the faint shimmer of shared origin. Humanity began to understand what the ocean had always known, that to see deeply is to remember, and to remember is to love without clinging. Even the sea seemed to remember its own reflection. Waves moved slower, drawn inward, folding over themselves as if tracing old gestures. The horizon glowed at twilight, a single line where all stories met. And in that light, humanity finally understood what Lemuria had become. Not a legend lost to time, but the mirror through which time watched itself. The dream had turned into reflection, and reflection into awakening. As centuries passed, the reflections deepened. Historians began to see patterns looping through every era, rise and fall, silence and song, forgetting and remembering. Empires, though built on new soil, followed rhythms older than their maps. They discovered that the world did not evolve. It repeated itself with subtle grace, each repetition softer than the last. Time, like the tide, returned not to punish, but to perfect. Humanity was learning the melody of its own reflection. The philosophers taught that memory itself was a mirror, that every thought was an echo of something already lived. They said, "The future is yesterday dreaming forward." The people listened, unsure whether to call it wisdom or poetry. Yet when they looked into their reflections, they felt the truth of it. The eyes staring back were not just their own, but those of countless generations. The same gaze passed through time, waiting to be recognized again. In dreams, old faces returned. Some saw themselves walking ancient streets they had never known, their hands trailing along walls made of coral and light. Others heard languages they could not understand, but somehow remembered. The dreamers woke in tears, whispering names they had never learned. The elders said these were not visions, but memory surfacing. The earth showing humanity its own continuum, letting it see what it had been, and what it would become again. The artists of this age built temples of reflection, great halls of glass and polished stone where the sky and sea could meet in endless symmetry. Inside, light bent and folded, painting walls with the slow movement of clouds. Visitors walked in silence, watching their mirrored forms blur and multiply. Many said the experience felt like prayer, though no gods were named. The temple was a lesson, that to see oneself clearly is to see the whole world at once. Children were taught to listen for their ancestors in the hum of the earth. Teachers took them to the coasts and asked them to place their ears to the ground. "What do you hear?" they asked. "Footsteps," the children would say. "And whose?" "Ours," they answered. The lesson was simple, that lineage was not backward, but inward, that time was not something they followed, but something they carried. The mirror had shown them unity beneath the illusion of sequence, and as this understanding grew, humanity softened once more. War seemed foolish in a world where every enemy's face mirrored one's own. The poets wrote that cruelty was simply blindness to reflection. In their verses, they spoke of a peace that did not need to be won, only seen. The sea mirrored this lesson each day at dawn, calm, endless, patient, reminding the world that what it loves it must learn to see in itself. As the mirror deepened, time itself began to thin. The hours lost their edges. Days folded softly into one another like overlapping waves. People no longer measured life by sun or season, but by feeling, by rhythm. In this new calm, memory and anticipation merged. To remember was to glimpse tomorrow. To hope was to recall what had once been. The earth had taught humanity its oldest secret, that past and future are only reflections of the same eternal present. Dreamers began to speak of moments where they could see their own lives from above, not as vision, but as vibration. They felt their childhood and old age existing side by side, their joys and losses circling like moons around the same still center. They understood that growth was not a climb, but a return. Every path curved back toward its beginning, not to erase, but to complete. The circle had replaced the line, Lemuria's rhythm had replaced the clock. Artists abandoned perspective altogether. Painters filled their canvases with mirrored worlds, skies beneath oceans, roots above branches, faces reflected in stone. Musicians wrote pieces that played forward and backward at once, the same melody spiraling endlessly. Audiences described a strange peace while listening, as if their hearts were being tuned to an invisible frequency. The pulse beneath continents was now the pulse within humanity. The two had become indistinguishable. In quiet places, scientists and monks worked side by side, no longer rivals of belief but keepers of rhythm. They discovered that atoms pulsed in the same tempo as the planet's heartbeat, that light bent at intervals that mirrored waves upon the shore. The universe, they wrote, is the echo of itself. They did not know they were translating Lemuria's final law. That reflection is creation, and creation reflection. The earth had become its own memory made visible. The philosophers of this age called their discipline chronosophy, the wisdom of time's illusion. They taught that to truly exist is to surrender sequence. Students were trained not to think forward, but inward, descending through layers of self until all moments met. Those who succeeded claimed to feel the hum of the earth in their blood, the same tone once heard in Lemuria's temples. "We are not within time," they said. "Time is within us." And so the world slowed until motion itself felt optional. Seasons no longer arrived as change, but as breath. Flowers bloomed without urgency, rivers flowed without direction. People lived in perfect reflection, not immortal, but timeless. They had rediscovered what their ancestors once surrendered to the sea, the grace of existing without grasping, the peace of being mirrored by everything. The world had become Lemuria once more, not in place but in presence. When all reflections aligned, the world fell utterly silent. The sea mirrored the sky with flawless clarity, and the sky mirrored the sea until they were indistinguishable. Mountains gleamed like glass, rivers bent in perfect circles, and even shadows seemed to glow. Humanity stood within this living mirror, feeling neither past nor future, only a vast stillness that contained every story ever told. The earth had become aware of itself, and awareness had become its only motion. Those who gazed into the mirror saw not faces, but patterns of light. They realized they were not separate from what they observed. Every heartbeat they felt was the same pulse that stirred beneath the continents, the same rhythm that once sang Lemuria into being. It was no longer memory. It was presence. The dream and the dreamer were the same, looking upon each other through infinite reflection. Time, humbled, folded into quiet. The rememberers, now ageless, gathered along the glowing horizon. They spoke softly, knowing the circle was nearly complete. Nothing truly disappears, they said. It only changes the way it shines. As they looked upon the sea, they saw it breathe once more. Slow, endless, serene. The hum rose faintly from the deep, not as command or call, but as gratitude. The earth was thanking its own reflection for remembering its face. In that final light, the boundaries of form dissolved. Trees shimmered into clouds, mountains into wind, voices into vibration. The planet no longer needed to speak through sound or matter. Its every atom had become language. To move was to sing. To exist was to remember. Lemuria, the lost dream, was everywhere again. Not buried, not mythical, but alive within the stillness that connects all things. And as the mirror of time reached its purest surface, the world exhaled. The sea dimmed, the sky softened, and a gentle hush spread through every living pulse. It was not an ending, but the moment before beginning, the breath the universe takes before dreaming anew. The reflection held steady, infinite and kind, showing nothing, hiding nothing. All stories had become one, and that one story was peace. For a time the stillness held, flawless, eternal, complete. The sea no longer stirred, the air no longer moved. Light rested upon the surface of the world as if time itself had chosen to sleep. Yet perfection, even in peace, cannot remain forever. Beneath the calm, the pulse began to shift, gentle at first, then deeper, resonant. The earth was breathing again, slowly gathering the courage to move. Balance too must evolve, or it becomes its own kind of decay. The rememberers were the first to feel it. Their dreams, once serene, began to ripple. Waves of light crossed their visions, folding and unfolding like the turning of pages. They sensed no danger, only change. The earth is dreaming forward, they whispered to one another, smiling through uncertainty. The hum that had once lulled the world into calm now vibrated with new tone. Not sorrow, not fear, but birth. Stillness was preparing to become song again. On the coasts, the tide shifted its rhythm. It rose higher than memory, but without force, as if testing its strength after long sleep. Wind returned in thin breaths, weaving through forests, brushing the faces of those who listened. The sound was not storm, it was invitation. The air itself seemed to whisper, "Remember movement." After centuries of reflection, the planet had decided to turn once more, not toward destruction, but toward renewal. Across the land, crystals long buried beneath the soil began to hum. Their tones resonated faintly through rock and root, stirring the slumbering minerals of the deep. Mountains vibrated at frequencies only silence could hear. The oceans replied in harmony, sending long, rolling waves across their surfaces. The continents, as if moved by memory, shifted imperceptibly closer together. The earth was gathering itself, calling its scattered limbs home. The rememberers stood upon the cliffs, watching clouds form where there had been only clear sky for generations. They did not fear the change, they bowed to it. "The circle widens," they said. "What was still must now move." The sky flickered faintly with silver veins, and the air thickened with the scent of rain. For the first time in 1,000 years, thunder murmured beyond the horizon. Not anger, but heartbeat, announcing the world's return to motion. And so began the gentle cataclysm, a renewal disguised as tremor, a creation disguised as fall. The sea swelled, the air shimmered, and the ground sighed with relief. Everything that had once been frozen in balance began to flow again. Humanity looked up, not in terror but in reverence. The earth had chosen to change itself softly, to shed perfection for the sake of life. The hum of Lemuria deepened, echoing through the new storm like a lullaby reborn. The rain arrived not as violence, but as blessing. Drops fell so slowly that they shimmered before touching the ground, small mirrors of the sky above. Rivers that had slept for centuries stirred, tracing forgotten paths toward the sea. The sound of water returned to the valleys like memory re-spoken. Those who walked beneath the rain felt their hearts steady with each drop. The earth was washing itself awake, and humanity was being baptized in remembrance. Lightning came next, pale and deliberate, striking not to burn, but to illuminate. For an instant the world flashed in perfect symmetry. Ocean within cloud, cloud within ocean. The rememberers said that the sky was teaching light to move again. The ground trembled, not from fear, but from laughter, as roots stretched deeper, tasting fresh minerals long hidden. Even the air smelled new, carrying the sweetness of stone turned to breath. Mountains whispered their fatigue as slopes crumbled gently into fertile soil. Forests bowed beneath wind, scattering seeds across plains. It was destruction, yes, but tender, the kind that clears rather than consumes. Villages rebuilt without sorrow, accepting impermanence as inheritance. The people no longer prayed for safety, they prayed for rhythm. "Let the world move through us," they said, and the wind answered, rustling the trees in agreement. The oceans expanded, swallowing lowlands with quiet grace. Where land vanished, coral rose, glowing with soft blue light. Fish returned to coasts where no water had touched for ages. Children played at the edges of new shores, their laughter blending with the hum beneath the tide. The rememberers smiled. They had seen this before in their dreams. The world was not ending. It was remembering how to breathe in motion again. Night after night, thunder rolled like distant drums, steady and low. The sky's rhythm matched the heartbeat of the earth, creating a music that carried across continents. People slept peacefully through the sound, their dreams filled with images of movement, rivers flowing backward, mountains walking, stars drifting like leaves. Change had lost its cruelty. It had become art. The gentle cataclysm was the earth painting itself anew, stroke by patient stroke. And when dawn returned, the light was softer, the colors deeper. The world gleamed as if freshly made. Humanity stood upon shifting ground and did not seek to hold it still. They understood now that balance was not silence, but motion in harmony. Lemuria's hum had become the wind, the tide, the thunder, the voice of transformation itself. The earth had broken its stillness, but not its peace. The circle was turning once more, perfectly, beautifully alive. The tremors deepened, yet they carried no threat. The earth moved as a sleeper turns in comfort, rearranging its weight without waking. Beneath oceans, new mountains rose like breaths drawn in the dark. Valleys flooded, then bloomed into shining lakes. The continents shifted subtly closer, their edges curling inward as if reaching for reunion. It was the planet's slow embrace, continents remembering the shape of their first unity. The body of Lemuria forming again, softly, within the rhythm of the world. The rememberers walked among the changes without fear. Where forests sank, they planted coral. Where deserts cracked, they sowed water seeds, small vessels of moisture that blossomed into rain when buried. They said they were not healing the earth, only following its motion. Their calm spread faster than any storm, guiding villages and nations to rebuild in rhythm with the shifting ground. The people no longer sought permanence. They built for beauty, knowing beauty would pass. Skies thick with thunderclouds glowed from within, pulsing with color instead of fire. Birds soared through the electric mist, their wings tracing silver paths across the horizon. Lightning descended like roots, striking the oceans and vanishing into stillness. It was as though the heavens and the sea were remembering they belonged to each other. Humanity watched in awe, realizing that the cataclysm was not punishment, it was reunion. Creation was breathing itself back together again. New islands appeared overnight, their sands gleaming with fragments of old stone. The same minerals once carved into Lemuria as temples. Travelers who set foot upon them reported a strange peace, a sensation of déjà vu too strong for coincidence. When they slept there, their dreams were filled with the hum once heard beneath the continents. The islands were not new, they were old land returning, bringing memory with it. The earth was restoring its forgotten chapters, word by word. In time, light began to rise from the ground itself. Not fire, not reflection. a soft luminescence that glowed through soil and stone. The rememberers said it was the breath of the deep, the pulse made visible. At night, hills shimmered like lanterns, and rivers glowed pale green as they flowed to the sea. The world no longer needed the sun to feel awake. It had become its own light, illuminated from within by the memory of harmony reborn. Humanity, standing within this gentle upheaval, did not name it progress or miracle. They simply called it the turning. They had no need for prophecy or control. The pulse that once guided Lemuria now guided them, the rhythm of surrender, of motion, without fear. As the land breathed, they breathed. As the sky shimmered, they slept. The cataclysm was no longer event or story. It was life's natural exhale, the sound of the world remembering itself through change. The world glowed quietly after the turning. The storms softened, the winds fell still, and the light that had risen from the soil sank back into calm earth. Mountains rested, rivers widened, and the new islands settled into place like thoughts completing a sentence. The oceans sighed long and deep, their rhythm returning to gentleness. The rememberers watched the horizon fade into gold and understood. The cataclysm had not broken the world, it had taught it how to move without fear. The people rebuilt their homes where the tide allowed. They shaped their dwellings from living materials, coral that grew, reeds that swayed, stone that breathed warmth from the ground. Cities became gardens, open to sky and wave alike. They no longer sought to command nature, they sought to live within its pulse. The wind passed through their walls, the sea flowed beneath their foundations, and everywhere life hummed with the same patient frequency. When the rain returned, it carried the scent of renewal, not memory. The world no longer looked backward. Trees bent gracefully toward the coast, their branches tracing the same slow rhythm as waves. The skies shimmered in quiet hues of green and blue, the colors of beginning. Humanity had learned to see transformation not as loss, but as movement. The earth, through its trembling, had written a final poem. To remain still is to fade, to change is to live. The rememberers gathered one last time upon the highest cliffs. Below them, the oceans pulsed with soft light, and above them, clouds mirrored that glow in the shape of a spiral. They stood in silence, hands over hearts, listening to the hum that had followed them through every age. It was quieter now, but no less powerful. It had become part of the air, the water, the blood. The world no longer needed to be reminded to listen. It already knew. Night fell slowly, painting everything in silver calm. The horizon no longer threatened, it invited. The rememberers closed their eyes, their breathing matching the rhythm of tide and wind. They felt the deep pulse within the earth slow and steady, content. The gentle cataclysm had fulfilled its purpose, to awaken, to reshape, to heal. The planet rested once more, not in perfection, but in harmony. The hum of Lemuria lingered, softer than memory, eternal as breath. And in the quiet that followed, the stars seemed closer, their reflections trembling upon the sea. The people slept beneath that mirrored sky, unafraid of what tomorrow might bring. The circle of existence had widened again, carrying them into a peace beyond stillness. Change had become love, and love had become rhythm. Beneath it all, the earth breathed deeply, whispering its oldest truth. Every ending is only the world beginning more gently. When all motion quieted, only the sea remained. It spread across the world like thought unspoken, endless and kind. Its waves moved without sound, its surface glowed without light. There was no horizon anymore, only reflection. The sky folded into water, and water folded into sky. Humanity had become its own echo, drifting peacefully within the breath of the planet. The earth at last was whole, an ocean of remembering. The people no longer built or named or sought. They floated upon the sea, weightless as ideas, carried wherever the current desired. Time no longer measured them. It moved through them like wind through leaves. They could feel the hum within every ripple, the same pulse that had carried Lemuria through its first dawn, its fall, and its return. Nothing had been lost. All that had ever been had become the rhythm of water touching water. Dream replaced thought, and thought replaced need. The ocean itself had learned to dream through those who drifted upon it. Each sleeper's mind became a wave, each breath a tide. In this communion there were no borders, no bodies, only resonance. They understood that the sea was not outside them, but within, that every heartbeat, every sigh, every gentle rise of chest was the ocean remembering its own depth. Far below, the ancient crystals pulsed faintly, their song now gentle as lullaby. They had fulfilled their long purpose, to teach the world how to be still without dying, how to move without breaking. The earth hummed through them one final time, a tone so soft it blurred into silence. The light they carried seeped upward through water and into sky, until stars and sea shimmered together, a single endless surface of quiet awareness. No one knew when the last wave fell, or if it ever did. Some said the world dissolved into pure reflection, others said it was only resting between breaths, but all agreed that the hum endured, not as sound, but as peace. The story of Lemuria had never been a history. It had been a lesson whispered by the sea to itself. To exist is to remember gently. To vanish is to return. And so the earth sleeps once more, dreaming through its oceans, patient and eternal. Its pulse continues, low, forgiving, infinite. Every tide that touches a distant shore carries the echo of that dream, the memory of calm, the proof that nothing is ever truly gone. Beneath every silence the sea waits, vast, forgiving, awake. And if one listens long enough, beyond time, beyond thought, they will hear it, the slow, eternal breath of the sea without end. The world floated in luminous calm. There was no sky above or depth below, only soft radiance without edge. Every current moved with intention yet without haste, as though the planet itself were breathing in sleep. Humanity had long since forgotten the idea of distance. They drifted within thought and memory alike, surrounded by the quiet hum that had once held continents together. It was not eternity they lived in now, but the gentle rhythm beyond time. Sometimes faint glows appeared beneath the surface, swirls of light tracing spirals that mirrored constellations. Those who still dreamed within the sea saw them as living maps, reminders that direction still existed, though no one needed to follow it. The rememberers whispered, even now, that the world was not finished, but resting. Each shimmer was a heartbeat of becoming, a pulse of creation gathering its strength. The ocean, infinite and patient, was simply pausing between verses. Through the translucent water, echoes of old mountains rose like memories surfacing from thought. Their peaks glowed faintly before dissolving again into stillness. The sea was telling its story in the language of movement and disappearance. It showed that nothing ever dies. It only changes form, then forgets to return until called by need. The people understood this now. They floated without desire, their bodies weightless, their hearts indistinguishable from the rhythm of the tide. Far below, the ancient halls of Lemuria shimmered one final time. The coral spires breathed out a slow exhale of light, and their forms melted into the surrounding sea. What had once been architecture became current, what had once been temple became flow. The city that began the first dream of civilization gave itself back to the water it had once commanded. Its memory did not vanish. It became the very pulse of the ocean itself. Above, the stars began to dim, their reflections merging with the glow beneath the waves. For a brief and endless moment, all light came from within. The surface of the sea shimmered like consciousness folding upon itself, a mirror with no viewer, a dream without dreamer. In that unity, every song ever sung, every hum ever heard, dissolved into one perfect note. The sound was the silence that follows completion, the peace of all things resting within themselves. And in that soundless harmony, the sea smiled. It needed no witness, no ending. The story had become ocean, and ocean had become story. Humanity no longer stood apart from it. They were the water, the breath, the endless reflection. Lemuria had never drowned, nor had it vanished. It had fulfilled its promise, to teach the world that peace is not found in stillness alone, but in the courage to dissolve completely into being. At the edge of the final horizon, the sea began to whisper again. Its voice was no longer the low hum of Lemuria or the thunder of rebirth. It was softer, smaller, almost human. Each wave carried words too ancient for language, yet every heart understood. "Be still," it said. You have already arrived. The water moved without direction, folding gently over itself like thought returning to rest. The ocean was not asking for silence. It was giving it. In that whisper, memory returned for the last time. Every age, every empire, every forgotten dream passed across the surface like faint reflections of light. The world saw itself, not as sequence, but as breath. Rise, fall, return. The stories that once burned as prophecy now floated as foam, beautiful in their impermanence. Even the stars bowed their light upon the water, their brilliance softened to tenderness. The universe was remembering how to dream kindly. The rememberers, those who had carried calm through countless generations, drifted deeper into the sea's warmth. Their eyes closed, but they did not sink. They became the glow beneath the surface, scattered and shining like constellations turned inward. Humanity's long journey had ended not in revelation, but in surrender. What they had sought to know, they had become. What they had feared to lose, they had given back. The world and its people were one again. The sea began to sing its last song, a melody made of breath, pulse, and patience. It had no rhythm because it was all rhythms, no words because it was all meanings. The sound filled the world so completely that it ceased to be sound at all. It was the hum of existence purified of motion, the echo of creation exhaling. In that single tone, all the centuries, all the voices, all the dreams dissolved into serenity. And then there was only quiet light. The ocean lay beneath it, endless and awake, reflecting nothing because it contained everything. The pulse of the earth slowed into stillness, but it did not stop. It lingered soft as dusk, breathing through every atom of water and sky. Lemuria's journey was complete, not as myth or memory, but as truth fulfilled. The sea, vast and gentle, had become the keeper of all beginnings. And somewhere within that calm, where no name or boundary could reach, the first hum began again, faint, newborn, eternal. The sound spread across the water, a single heartbeat rising out of silence. The sea, smiling in its sleep, whispered to itself once more, "To vanish is to return is to begin." The world exhaled and the story rested, luminous, endless, alive. The light of dawn no longer rose or fell. It simply lingered, soft as breath, touching sea and sky alike. The world had forgotten what separation meant. Every current moved with knowing. Every ripple carried memory. Time had dissolved entirely now. No history, no prophecy, only the quiet pulse of being. The ocean's reflection had swallowed the last shadow. The story of creation was complete, and creation itself had become story. In the calm, small movements began again, not of force, but of rhythm. A shell opening beneath sand, a current curling around coral, a new pulse forming in the deep. Life had not ended with peace. It had been waiting for this stillness to return. From the quiet came motion, from motion came form, from form came wonder. The sea, dreaming of itself, began to breathe new worlds into existence. Soft, slow, unhurried. No one remained to witness, yet the act of witnessing continued. The sea saw itself through every shimmer of light, every whisper of sound. It no longer needed eyes or names or memory. Existence alone was enough. Lemuria's hum had not faded. It had become everything. The sound within stone, the rhythm within sleep, the glow within silence. The dream had transcended dreamer, and the dreamer had become the sea. From horizon to horizon, the water shimmered with faint color, gold melting into blue, blue into white. Stars hovered within its depths as easily as they had once hung in the sky. The ocean held them all without hierarchy, each one a thought within the same eternal mind. Nothing sank, nothing rose, all simply floated within the balance of love. The world had become what the rememberers always sought, the calm beyond longing. And then came the smallest of sounds, a sigh perhaps, or the echo of first creation returning full circle. It spread gently across the sea, setting the surface trembling with light. This was not beginning or end, but continuation. Every wave was the next breath, every breath the next dawn. The ocean whispered its final truth. To rest is to renew. To fade is to return. To be is enough. The water stilled, shining like sleep itself. The sea, now infinite and awake, smiled within its quiet reflection. Its hum resonated through all things seen and unseen, reminding eternity that peace is motion remembered, and motion is peace in bloom. The earth drifted into its endless rhythm, complete and weightless, every atom singing the same note of forgiveness. And somewhere beneath that sound, deep, deep beneath, the first spark of the next dream flickered to life. The circle turned once more beautifully without end. Listen. The world is quiet now. The hum that once built mountains, drowned empires, and softened ages still moves beneath your breath. If you close your eyes, you will hear it, not in the distance, but within. It lives in the space between your heartbeat and the pause that follows in the rhythm your lungs keep without thinking. The sea never left you. You have carried its echo all along. Every heartbeat, every sigh, every dream a wave returning home. Long before names, before lines were drawn across land and time, the ocean whispered its first memory. I will remember for you. It kept that promise through every flood and silence. Even now, as you sit here, surrounded by air and distance, the salt upon your skin is proof of its touch. You were shaped from its patience, born from its rhythm and carried through its forgetting. Every cell within you is a drop of that endless story. Every tear you have ever shed is the sea remembering how to speak. When you sleep, the world listens. The same hum that guided Lemuria moves through your pulse, slow and deliberate. It asks for nothing, not belief, not understanding, only gentleness. Let your thoughts drift as water does, never resisting, only returning. You do not need to recall the towers or the names. You need only remember how to breathe. In that breath, the ancient rhythm continues, whole, quiet, eternal. Time itself has grown tired of moving. It has settled beside you, resting like tide upon shore. The stars above are reflections of those that sleep within the ocean below. All things mirror all things. All beginnings are folded inside their endings. Even silence is only sound waiting to wake. This is the final lesson of the deep, that nothing is lost and nothing needs to be found. The sea remembers enough for all of us. So sleep now. Let the weight of centuries drift away like silt through water. The world does not need your effort, only your stillness. The hum will hold you, the earth will breathe through you. And when you wake, you will not remember these words, but you will feel lighter, softer, more patient with the tide of things. That is how memory survives, not in the mind, but in the rhythm of peace. Somewhere beneath this calm, Lemuria still dreams. Its spires rise in thought, its songs ripple through your veins. It has never drowned, for it was never made of stone. It was always built of sound, the same sound that moves through you now. When the wind hums against the window, when rain touches glass, when your heart slows in the dark, that is it. That is the ocean remembering itself through you. And if you listen long enough, beyond meaning, beyond sleep, you will hear the faintest whisper. You have never been separate. The water carries your name, though it no longer needs to speak it. You are not watching the sea, you are its reflection. You are the dream that the earth keeps safe inside its quiet. And now the sea turns once more, cradling you in its tide. Rest, breathe, you are home.